Good morning, everyone. So excited to see you on this Friday afternoon. We will start with having Rachel call roll to establish a quorum. So I'll pass it over to you, Rachel.
Good morning. Thank you, Melanie. Melanie Green.
Here.
Ed Manansala.
Here.
Jorge Aguilar. Ron Anaya.
Here.
Bootsy Battlehold.
Here.
Mia Cooper.
Here.
Diane Grote-John.
Here.
Joanne Iskin. Linda Kaminsky.
Here.
Joanne is here.
Kimberly Kenny.
Here.
Is she?
Yeah, I'm here. Joanne Iskin.
Perfect. Thank you, Joanne. Kimberly, did you say here? Sorry, I missed that.
Here. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Tara Kinney.
Here.
Nancy Portillo. Karina Small.
Here.
And Janelle Woodward.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Melanie, we have a quorum. Did we just lose Melanie?
For 1 second.
Oh, there you go.
Did we get everyone? Sorry, I think we ended right when Zoom kicked me off.
Yeah, we got everybody.
We do.
Okay, great. Well, I hereby call to order the February 2021 meeting of the California Practitioners Advisory Group to order at 9:02. And I'd like to commence by saluting the flag. So there should be a flag visible in just a second. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. All right, I would like to welcome our new California Practitioner Advisory Group member, Mia Cooper. We will go over some introductions to CPAG in a little bit, but just want to say congratulations and welcome. We'll also begin with a little bit of housekeeping today. The LCFF stakeholder meeting will take place on February 23rd at 1 p.m. It will focus on the growth model and provide an opportunity for interested stakeholders to ask questions, receive clarification on the ETS report and the item that's presented today. I encourage you to attend. They're so helpful. CDE and SBE staff encourage you to attend. It's a great place to ask questions and get things clarified. We will be taking breaks following each item today. And as a reminder, the chat function should be used by CPAG members. As a reminder, the chat function should not be used by CPAG members unless you're in need of technical assistance with Zoom. It's a violation of Bagley-Keene to use the chat function unless to use the chat function to discuss the meeting. So we'll start by taking up item 4 out of order to approve the minutes from December 2020. And I'd like to invite board member Eileen Strauss, to make any comments and swear in our new CPAG member, Mia Cooper, who will be representing specialized instruction, support personnel, and paraprofessionals.
So good morning, everybody, and thanks for making the time to work with us today on this really a few important items. Mia, welcome. I'm going to swear you in. You should have a copy of your oath, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read part of it and then you'll repeat after me. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, good. So I state your name.
Mia Cooper.
Do solemnly swear or affirm.
Do solemnly swear or affirm.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
I will bear true faith and allegiance.
I will bear true faith and allegiance.
to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservations or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
and that I will and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Well, congratulations, Mia, and welcome to CPAG. We're delighted on the State Board to have you join us and provide your important voice to the work that we have ahead. And welcome to everybody, and thank you all for being here this morning.
Thank
I'll
you.
turn it back to the chair.
Thank you so much, Board Member Strauss. Thank you so much, Mia Cooper, for joining us. We're excited to have you on CPAG. You'll see on the screen that the public comment line information is up. Members of the public wishing to call in for public comment should view the live stream of the meeting to know at what time public comment will occur for each item. Public comment may also be provided during the meeting by dialing the Zoom number and following a prompt to enter the meeting ID and access code that will be displayed on the screen. The operator will notify callers when it's their turn to provide public comment. We also ask callers to please turn down the speaker volume of their computers if they are following the live webcast to avoid an echoing effect. So for those who used to call into radio hotlines or radio hosts, you got to turn down your computer as you're talking. Public comment will be limited to 1 minute for each speaker. Item 5 is the general public comment item, during which members of the public may provide comment on matters that are not specifically listed on the CPAG agenda. And just a reminder for all of us CPAG members, CDE and SBE staff, please mute your microphones when not speaking. Keep your cameras on at all times, except during the scheduled breaks, to ensure we maintain a quorum throughout today's virtual meeting. And for each item on the agenda, there will always be an opportunity for CPAG members to raise your hand using the Zoom participant window if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. So Mia, you probably were already talked about this, but just under participants, you can raise your hand, and that's how I'll know that you want to ask a question or share a comment during each item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we'll now take up item 4 to approve the minutes from the December 2020. Sorry, Sarah, do we have any public comment for item 5 for the general public comment?
No, item 5 will be taken up last. We will do that at the end, so you can move on to item 4.
Okay. So now we'll take up item 4 to approve the minutes from the December 2020 CPAG member. Everyone, you provided the link to the draft minutes that were posted on the CPAG website. I'll give you a few minutes to review them. And for those listening, we'll open up the line for public comment. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling in on the number on the slide, and you'll be notified when it's your time to speak. We encourage you to state your name and affiliation for the record. And again, remember to turn down the volume of your computers if you're following the live feed. And speakers will be limited to 1 minute. So you'll see the phone number, meeting ID, and passcode on the screen right now if you're calling in to provide if you're calling in to provide comment on the minutes, the draft minutes. Sarah, do we have any public comment for this item?
Nobody has called in for public comment for this item.
Great, thank you. CPAG members, is there any discussion for this item? Remember, raise your hand in the participant panel, and I'll make sure to call your name. Kimberly, go ahead. I see your hand.
Just a quick question. remind me, should there be PowerPoints that we would have seen or that would be attached to the public agenda for today's meeting? Sorry, this is like a general question.
The PowerPoint presentations have been added to the box folder that you were all sent with the agenda, and we are working on getting them posted to the agenda today.
Okay, I got a box folder for comments. They're in that same box folder. I just didn't find them earlier in the week there.
Correct. We put them in there this morning.
All right. Well, I guess I just want to make a comment then that it's really useful to have those to read prior to the meeting as preparation. I mean, I did read the memos, but it's, you know, especially I think usually it's the PowerPoints that say, you know, here's what we'd like the CPAG members to give us input on, you know, and there's usually a question or something. Maybe that's not happening today, but so just wanted to make that general comment. Thanks.
We have one person who has called in for public comment. Would the caller with phone number ending in 8256 begin your public comment now? Caller with phone number ending in 8256, you should be allowed to speak if you would like to make a public comment. All right. Well, caller, if you would like to try again, we can see if you are able to get through.
All right. Any other questions from CPAG members? Let me scroll through, make sure I'm not missing a hand. All right. Do I have a motion to approve the draft minutes? Joanne, is that a motion from you?
Yes, it is.
All right, I have a motion from Joanne, and do I have a second?
A second.
All right, I think I got a second from Tarina. Is that right? Okay, Tarina, I see you nodding your face. Great. Nodding your head. Now we'll have a roll call vote. And Mia, just so you know, you'll abstain from this item, being a new member. But then all future meetings, you'll be able to approve for the minutes. So Rachel, I will pass it over to you for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Melanie. Melanie Green.
Yes.
Ed Manansala.
Aye.
Jorge Aguilar. Ron Anaya.
Aye.
Bootsy Battleholt.
Aye.
Diane Grotan.
Aye.
Joanne Iskin.
Aye.
Linda Kaminsky.
Aye.
Kimberly Kenny.
Aye.
Tara Kinney.
Aye.
Nancy Portillo. Tarina Small.
Aye.
Janelle Woodward.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for reviewing and approving the minutes. So this now concludes this item, and we are going to move past item 1 because we want to make sure we have our attorney here for that item. So we will move to item 2. So if you're following on an agenda or anything, I'll just give you a second to get there. So I'm so excited for agenda item 2. It's the 2021 Accountability Work Plan. This item will be presented by Cindy Kazanis and Jenny Singh. And Cindy, I will pass it over to you when you're ready.
Thanks, Melanie. Just waiting for the slide deck to come up. Great. Cindy Kazanis, Director of the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. And today I'm going to be joined by Jenny Singh and Jonathan Eisler, who are both administrators in our division, who are going to assist with covering our work plan. So we've broken this up into two sections. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the data that we reported on for 2020, which is a follow-up to our last conversation. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time walking you through the 2021 accountability work plan, which will be taken to the State Board of Education at their March meeting for discussion and feedback. So for our available data that we've reported for this year, or this past year rather, so part of what I wanted to do was to frame it. Of course, thinking back almost a year ago with the pandemic really changing the way that we've worked, not only in the 1920 school year, but definitely in the 2021 school year. The U.S. Department of Education, of course, offered up a waiver to states, which all the states took them up on, which waived not only statewide accountability and reporting requirements, but of course our state assessments. So the U.S. Department of Education's action precipitated a later action by the state legislature to prohibit the Department of Education from publishing our state and local indicators on the 2020 dashboard. It also further imposed a requirement that the department review the data to ensure that it was valid and reliable before producing it somewhere else on our website, which is oftentimes our DataQuest website. So we did produce a 2020 dashboard. We released it on December 14th. And what it included was really to show who was in existence at the time as a school district in the 2019-2020 school year, what the student population looked like. So if there's interest in looking from year to year about shifts in population, you could toggle between the dashboard years. And then there's a landing page to our COVID-19 and data reporting website. And really, we've continued to update that web page on a frequent basis to ensure that it has the latest information about what's been published on other parts of the department's website. Additionally, in January, just about a month ago, we released additional reports. So the additional reports are a function. Instruction. So for specifically, we've released additional reports on graduation rates. So on the additional reports, you'll be able to find the combined 4- and 5-year rates, which have been used in accountability, as well as the rates for our dashboard alternative school status. Further, you can find information on how many students were prepared and which measure they were prepared by, looking at the College Career Measures report. And again, all this information you can find off of that COVID-19 webpage, or you can go directly to the accountability website on the CDE's webpage. Additionally, thank you. For each of those reports, we have associated data files, including frequently asked questions, and these are the direct links to those data files, as well as some frequently asked questions around data for the 2020 school year related to accountability. So we've been collecting these over the last couple of months, especially as we were gearing up for release of these data. So there are obviously a couple of data points we're not able to report on this year. And again, this year being 2019-20. So the school year ending last June or July. Specifically around our assessments, we cannot produce any information around the academic indicator or the English learner progress indicator because of the suspension of both of those assessments. Additionally, thinking about the previous slide around SB 98 and the need to make sure that the data that we did release was valid and reliable, we were not able to determine that the chronic absenteeism rates were reliable. So we are not able to produce that information this year. We've put that caveat on our website, on that data reporting webpage. And so what we are suggesting, and we've actually just completed 2 webinars around how to assist local educational agencies in completing their LCAP, is we gave some really specific guidance on LEA's use of their local data. Of course, when it comes to absenteeism rates, the richest information is at the school site. It's that daily interaction with the teacher and the student. The Department of Education never gets access to that data. We only have an aggregate of how many days a student was expected to be there and how many days they actually attended. So this one in particular, especially as we're encountering the 2020-2021 school year and the additional requirements at the local level related to attendance, this is a really critical piece that I just wanted to emphasize, that local data collection and access to that data. So with that, we're going to shift over to the 2021 Accountability Work Plan. And specifically, we have several topic areas that we're going to cover today. The first one around teacher data that is shifting under the local control funding formula, priority area 1, from potentially a local indicator to a state indicator. Additionally, information around positive transition rate for DAS schools. Jenny will cover these next several items, including enrollment data for students attending and transitioning between DAS and non-DAS, information around student level files, some really exciting news around giving LEAs access to information on the CCI and the academic indicator, as well as a brief overview of the student growth model, communication plan, which we're going to go into, of course, in item 3 into much greater detail. And then we will cover briefly the English learner progress indicator reporting. Additionally, there's a couple of updates we have related to our continuing work on the college career measures with industry certification and civic engagement. And before I turn it over to Jonathan, I think there's probably a question on several of your minds about the special board meeting next week. And if you have not seen it, there is a special board meeting scheduled for Wednesday where they are expected to talk about what we will be doing with student assessments this year. I don't have any information to give you at this time, and the work plan that you're going to see today is based on the fact that we believe that we will be testing this year. So we will, depending on the actions by the board, whether it's at this special board meeting or it's at a later date, we are ready to pivot on this work plan as needed, like you saw us do last year. On several occasions, you heard us talk about how COVID had affected not only our work, but what we do around accountability. And so I just wanted to provide that caveat that I don't have any further information to share with you at this time, but that we are tracking that action very closely, and we will do what we need to make sure that we can get access to whatever data we are able to collect and make available to the field so they can inform instruction and learning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Eisler to start us off on teacher data.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Good morning, CPAG members and Chair Green. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to follow up on what Cindy started talking about in terms of LCFF priority area 1 and the teacher data. As reference, all of the requirements for these data are under California Education Code 52064.5. We did present to the State Board of Education back in September of 2020 some updates. So a lot of what I'm going to share here is kind of summarizing some of that information as well as giving some updates. If you wanted to know more detail about that particular item, that was in item 2 back in September 2020 if you wanted to click on that link. As a reminder, education code, this particular education code requires the state board on or before October 1st, 2016 to develop evaluation rubrics, which obviously we now know as the California School Dashboard, or as a tool to help schools and districts identify strengths and weaknesses, as well as assist superintendents in identifying school districts and schools in need of technical assistance. So obviously, this assists us in creating the lists for differentiated assistance, as well as for federal accountability around CSI and ATSI. And there's also state and local measures drawn from the 10 priority areas of LCFF. Those are also required as part of Education Code 52064.5. Back in 2019, Senate Bill 75 was actually passed, and that updated the Education Code with additional information about local indicators, more details. Next slide, please. So just again, as a reminder, and this is also on the CDE webpage, here are the 10 state priority areas and local indicators. Obviously, priority areas 9 and 10 only apply to county offices of education. And you can see the other 8 priority areas. Really, we identified that the teacher data regarding credentialed teachers in the basic priority area 1 was kind of the first data set that we could start looking at to be able to apply to both this education code and Senate Bill 75. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we did identify this teacher assignment data as the first data set that would meet the standards of SB 75. And what's really important here, and I'm just going to read directly from the language, these are data that, quote, reflect school level data to the extent the department collects or otherwise has access to relevant and reliable school level data for all schools statewide. So remember, we want to make sure that you understand that for this teacher assignment data, we need to work collaboratively with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, or CTC, to meet these requirements. So the CDE does not collect these data on our own. We actually have multiple data sharing agreements with the CTC in order to reach the data that are needed to meet this priority area 1 reporting. Next slide. So let me just have a brief discussion on kind of some of the history of the data exchanges between CDE and CTC. So back in October of 2018, we signed an initial Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, data sharing MOU, to formally exchange teacher and credential data. So the 2019-20 school year was the very first year that this data exchange started happening. And what happens is we require the CTC, we provide them with data from our CalPADS Fall 2 collection. The CTC then has created their own data system, which is called the California Statewide Assignment Accountability System, or CalSAS, which is specifically aimed at looking at teacher monitoring. They then plug our CalPADS data into their CalSAS system. The CTC subsequently matches those data with their credential data, and then they provide back to the CDE information that's needed for the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, reporting requirements. So these are the kind of 3 steps that are needed for that to take place. So just recently, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, the CDE received ineffective and out-of-field teacher data from the CTC for the first time. And again, these are required to meet the federal reporting requirements under ESSA. So right now, really, we're at the very initial stages of conducting data analyses, data quality checks to determine the validity and reliability of the data. So again, just recently received these data, just now initially having staff looking at and reviewing the data. So there are data releases associated with the teacher data. So in the spring of 2021, the first reports are going to come out. These are the 2019-20 school year teacher assignment monitoring related reports. So these will come out on DataQuest. There will also be related downloadable files that will be available on our website. Later this year in the summer, there's going to be, again, based on the 2019-20 school year data, there will be new staff, course, and class-related reports also on DataQuest. There will also be downloadable files to support this. And what's nice and kind of exciting about this work is that there's actually going to be some enhanced functionality that will be provided along with these downloadable files. So again, these are all obviously in production now and working with the original data that we got, but we're planning for later this year to have enhanced functionality. And then the other place, an important place where these data are also reported is in the School Accountability Report Cards, or the SARCs. And many of you know that the SARCs for this past year were just published on February 1. And we're also excited, just as a side, to note that we just added some new functionality and upgrades to the SARC. We're very excited about that system. But in any case, that data, since we obviously just now got this new round of data, are just looking at it, that data will not be published until the following year's SARC. So that's the SARC that's due February 1, 2022. And like many of the data elements on the SARCs, the CDE actually pre-populates these tables as well as many other tables on the SARC for districts and schools. Okay, so just want to make really clear here in terms of just additional information about the reporting of these teacher assignment data. The legislation that came about for this calls for the development of, quote, objective criteria that may include the extent of any disparities across school sites. That's what's required in statute. So we are working this year, 2021, we just got the data, we're working on it, but we want to make really clear what we do with all of the state indicators. And I know, Jenny Singh has mentioned this to this group and others many times. When we get data, new data, we really need 2 years of data to be able to look at kind of meaningful objective standards on how schools and districts are performing on a particular indicator. So obviously, with the other state indicators that Jenny's group has worked with, they needed 2 years worth of data to really be able to look at creating objective standard measures for doing it. So again, we just got the first year of these data and reviewing it. And it's really important to also note that we're going to be working very closely with stakeholders, with different groups, get feedback on how this work is going, looking at the data together. And again, we'll take this, all of this information to state board for adoption. But again, it's a multiple step process where we're going to engage stakeholders along the way. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it back to Cindy and Jenny.
Thank you, Jonathan. So this is Jenny Singh, and I'm going to be presenting the rest of the throughout the rest of the presentation. We're going to start off with the DAS positive transition rate. So at the November 2020 SBE meeting, the Alternative Schools Task Force presented presented a document with recommendations for things that they would like to see happen for DAS schools. And one of those recommendations was to establish a new local indicator specifically for DAS schools. And that indicator would focus on alternative school students' continued path to further education. And in conversations between SBE and CDE staff, we realized that a new indicator would require a change in current LCFF statutes. But we could actually produce this report, CDE staff could produce this report and place it in our additional reports for informational purposes. And we could produce this report by using data from the CalPads and the exit codes. So it's important to understand that the intent of this indicator was to look at those students in DAS schools who were in the graduation rate denominator, but were not in the numerator. So they were the non-graduates. And we wanted to look at those students to see if they continue their path to education. And so some of the things that may be included in this positive transition rate are a return to a traditional comprehensive high school, enrollment in a non-DAS general education diploma program or an adult education program, enrolling in a community college, or joining the military, or participating in Job Corps or youth build programs. Both of those programs provide students with the ability to earn their high school diploma and get skills in order to enter the workforce. Now, these are things that we would explore, and we have a process for doing that. So if it's on the list, doesn't necessarily mean it will make it into the transition rate. And if it's not on the list, it doesn't mean that something else won't be added to the list. So you may recall that when we first implemented the DAS graduation rate, the SBE members did raise some concern that they thought that since we had a DAS graduation rate, that might encourage schools to transfer more students from a comprehensive school to a DAS school. So we had agreed to monitor this, and in August of 2019, we provided the SBE with a memo that actually showed the transfer patterns, and it was by race and ethnicity student group and by program student group counts, and it was actually by month counts. And it showed that there really was no increase. It was pretty consistent. There was one exception. There was a decrease in foster youth transfers in the 2018-19 year. So we are going to go back and we are going to be conducting this analysis again for the next 2 years. And so we are going to be producing the enrollment patterns of DAS schools for 2019-20 and a 2021 SB information memorandum. So just if you're interested in that, just keep your eyes open. That's coming soon.
Hey, Jenny, can we pause just for 1 second for one question from the CPAG?
Sure.
Okay, Kimberly, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, I know there's a lot of different topics, so I wanted to ask while we were. So something that just recently came to my attention in my district was that if I looked at our graduation rate for non-DAS schools, it's 12 points higher than our 4-year cohort graduation rate for all of our students together with our DAS schools. And what I can't tell is if we have a average percentage of our senior school, 4-year cohort in DAS schools. And so I don't know if that's something that is kind of tangential to what you're going to be measuring here. It looked like we had been sending fewer kids to our DAS schools and it's starting to uptick again. And so again, I'm looking at, over 5 years. So I think this is very important information. I just find that people really are concentrating on the graduation rates of our comprehensive schools and not paying as much attention to our overall graduation rates. And I worry that too many kids are being pushed out of our high schools. And so I would really find that valuable to kind of know, what is there an average or what is the range of students who seem to be in alternative ed DAS schools by district? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Jenny, we have one more question. Linda?
Thank you very much. I just, let me know if it's better to ask this question later or now, but I had a question in general related to earlier discussions years ago on adult education. And the question at the time was, and oftentimes the practice at the time was that students who were not doing well in what we now call DAS schools would move over to adult education and be considered, in a sense, as graduates. But there was no accountability for what happened to them while they were in the adult education programs in terms of did they complete a GED or some other type of certification that they had met the requirements. And similarly, with the question of community college, we know that as a state, we're still working on making sure that students who enter community college complete a certificate or transferable credits in a timely fashion. And that's a work in progress. So my question really is, how does this work in informing us about the performance of kids who are leaving a DAS school and moving to other programs if we don't have enough information, or if these programs still are working on trying to ensure that the students who do join them, in fact, finish something?
And I'm assuming you're talking about the transition rate, Linda?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we do have some data in regards to DAS schools. When we were first looking at students enrolled in community colleges, actually DAS schools had more students enrolled in community college. And as we worked with our group, our our task force, our alternative schools task force, we realized that the reason for that is because, these are usually older students who are behind in credits, and it's really hard to keep them engaged in high school. So they would enroll them in dual enrollment courses. So they would get credit for college and high school. So that was something that would keep them engaged in school and move forward. So we thought this was a very positive thing. We are going to hopefully soon have our cradle to career, where we can actually share data between community college and UCs and CSUs. As of now, we really can't track students and how they perform when they get into, when they actually exit a high school and just go directly to a community college. But we do see that as a positive transition. Then the question, this is a big policy question. The question is how long are we going to hold our high schools accountable for the students that have moved on to like community college? Are we going to say that we can't say that's a positive transaction unless they actually, graduate with a degree? Or are we going to say that just transitioning to that and getting them into courses is the way we want to go? So there's a lot of conversations that we're going to have about the transition rate and how we're going to put that together.
And thank you. I appreciate that discussion about the community college. What about adult education programs?
I really don't have a lot of information about adult education programs, so I'm going to be relying on the conversations that we're going to have with our alternative schools task force. These are people who are actually in districts and charter schools who are working in various alternative school settings. So they would have a lot more insight to that than I actually have at this point in time.
Well, that brings up a good point, because since they are within districts typically, or shared among districts, the information ought to be available in terms of how they're progressing, and if they are meeting some level of expectation, either for making adequate progress the year they move there, or complete some, a program there. And
that is true. We do have information in CalPADS. I just haven't looked into it yet. It's not something that.
I guess I'm just saying, I would encourage us to think about how we know that the move that the students make was a positive move that had a good outcome for that student. And I'm sure we all want that, but it's just a matter of being able to document it. So thank you very much.
Okay, I do see two more questions. I want to make sure, just while Cindy's presenting or while Jenny's presenting, it's just clarifying questions. So I see Diane and Ron. Do you have clarifying questions, or do you want to hold them to the end of the presentation? Diane, you're first.
Just a real quick one. The transition, as I understand things, Jenny, the positive transition rate is not changing in any way, shape, or form the graduation rate calculation, right? So you would still have a graduation rate that would show those students that positively transit as being negative impacts on the graduation rate. Is that correct?
That is correct. It does not impact the graduation rate at all. It's additional information that would be available for DAS schools to see if the students who didn't graduate actually had a positive transition, and if not, what could they put in place to ensure that would happen in the future?
Thank you. Thank you.
Ron?
Actually, Diane's question and Jenny's response clarified the question that I had, so thank you both.
Great. Okay, go ahead, Jenny.
Okay. So there are some good things that came out of the pandemic, not very many, but a few. And one of the things that actually came out of it was that it's because we didn't have to produce a dashboard, we were able to work on some things that we wanted to work on, but just couldn't because we just didn't have the resources. So we've been getting a lot of requests from the field that they would like to have a student level data file for the CCI and academic indicators. And currently, you may know this, but there are some CalPADS reports that are tied to the dashboard, state indicators that districts and schools have access to, which is the graduation rate, chronic absenteeism, and suspension rate. but there isn't one for the CCI or for the academic indicator. You can get data on the CCI from the CalPADS report, but it's really quite cumbersome, and you have to go through multiple CalPADS reports and then kind of pull it all together. And I just don't think districts have the time or resources to do that. So based on the request that we've been getting from the field, we are in the process of producing secure student-level data files for the CCI and academic indicators for LEAs so they can conduct deeper analysis for those two state indicators. We'll hopefully have that ready for the spring. We have to develop an API. No, I don't know what that stands for, but it's a technical term. We're working with our technical team so we can transmit that data in a secure fashion. Of course, we're going to be looking at the growth model communication plan. If the board approves the student level growth model at the March meeting, that's next month, and I'm pretty confident they will, we will begin the development of our plan for the student growth model. We are really going to focus on obtaining feedback via focus groups and outreach to various stakeholders. And in addition, one of the things that we've had conversations with the state board and our stakeholder groups is a need for a report that displays the LPAC levels along with a growth score. So we're going to be working with that to develop that report. Of course, we will get feedback on that report before it is posted because we want to make sure that whatever we produce provides valuable information and that it's easy to understand. So for our LP, the CD plans on producing an LP status and change and overall performance color using 3 years of LPAC summative assessment results. You can see here that it's going to be 2018, 19, and 21. Of course, we're skipping a year because we don't have 2020 results. And we will work with the LP work group and our technical design group to validate the current LP status cut scores. Because when you have more years of data, you want to go back and make sure that everything is working out the way you thought it would be. And then we'll set the change cut scores and determine the 5x5 chart, and of course bring that to the state board for approval. So I want to move to the updates that we have for the new CCI measures. I'm not sure if you are aware, but we have been asked to look at incorporating civic engagement into the CCI. The state board has asked us to do that. And of course, we've gotten lots of requests from the field to include industry certifications, and licenses as well. And so this is good news, bad news. The bad news is we cannot collect that data during the 21-22 school year. The good news is the reason we can't do that is we are redesigning, or our technical people are redesigning CalPADS. They're doing a re-architecture of the system. This is going to be extremely helpful for LEAs. Currently, when LEAs upload data, the system can't handle multiple people, multiple LEAs loading up multiple files. But when this new system is done, districts will no longer have to wait in a queue for their turn to upload the files. Everyone's going to be able to upload all their files at the same time. This is going to be really helpful with Fall 1, Fall 2, and end-of-year data submissions. And we're hopeful that because it's easier to do, it is going to actually improve the data that we get. But we are still going to work closely with our CCI work group, the Alternative Schools Task Force, and our Civic Engagement work group throughout 2021 to define these measures so that they can be collected in 22-23. The CDE is also committed to providing LEAs and schools with valuable and reliable data for developing their improvement plans. Cindy mentioned that we are, we don't exactly know. There's a lot of unknowns right now about what's going to happen with accountability, but we are ready to pivot whenever decisions are made. So we've been thinking about a couple of options of what we can do if we do not produce a 2021 dashboard. One option is to produce additional reports for the data that are available, such like we did this year, the combined graduation rate, the DAS graduation, and rates, whatever data may be, other data may be available. Or we could actually do a second option, which is to develop reports that were similar to the LCFF priority reports or snapshots. Don't know if you remember that, but those reports were produced prior to the dashboard for LEAs and schools. It was provided for informational purposes only, but based on the feedback we received from the fields, that information was quite helpful in the development of their LCAPs. So if we do develop this new report, what could we possibly put in there? Well, some things are like English learners reclassification rates, high school graduation rates, completion rates for A through G, CTE pathway, apprenticeships, other CCI measures, high school graduation scores on advanced placement exams, graduation rates, high school dropout rates, and other measures that we feel would be helpful for LEAs. And so that comes to the feedback that we would like. First, we would like to know if you have any concerns regarding the proposed 2021 activities. If so, what are the concerns and why? And then also for the 2021 accountability reporting, which data reporting alternative do CPAG members prefer and why? So if we end up not producing a dashboard, would you rather go with the additional reports, or would you like a new report that is similar to the LCFF snapshot? And if there are specific data elements that you think should go into those reports, that would be nice to have right now. So with that, I'd like to open it up for conversation.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I just have to give a shout out to your team, to Cindy. Not only do you all do incredible work to support districts and counties and schools across the state, but you're really responsive when districts need even more help. And I just want to say thank you, because it's a huge testament to how much you all value our districts and schools making meaning out of the data that you put out. And I want to say thank you, because I've seen that firsthand and just so responsive to the needs of our districts and schools. And I also want to acknowledge, I saw Joanne having some good excitement over there with the changes in CalPads. I saw that face, Joanne. So I wanted to say I saw some kudos from there. CPAG members, just looking to see if there's any hands for any responses to Jenny's questions or any other additional clarifying questions that you had. Okay, we'll start. I see Kimberly and then Linda. So we'll start with Kimberly. Go ahead.
I want to echo your compliments. I think that there is just a wealth of information on DataQuest now. I'm not sure the public even knows, because they'll say, well, this information probably isn't available. And I'll say, oh, yes, maybe you haven't been to DataQuest, where you can filter and sort and do amazing things with the public data. So I look at it. I check for what's new at least once a week. Anyway, it's very, very helpful and useful. And, especially for districts, during this last year and districts that are struggling with budget, they don't always have time to produce a lot of data reports that are available to the public. So it's really, really nice to have this. Having said that, I am very interested in whatever kind of reporting we can do on EL reclassification rates. It really is a very important indicator. It's one of the priority indicators, but it's not currently part of our dashboard. So I think hopefully the long-term solution is that it becomes part of the dashboard. To me, it's just it is more important to see if students achieve fluency, and therefore, especially in high school and middle school, don't have to take an extra class of English language development every day, which prevents them from taking other courses. It's more important to measure that they've reached that bar than just to measure that they're making progress, which I know is what the federal government requires us to do. But I'm hopeful that, anywhere we can add that to new dashboards or new reports, but I'm still hopeful it will end up on the regular dashboard. Thanks.
Melanie, can I just add a clarification here?
Yes, go ahead, Cindy.
So I just wanted to make sure that Member Kenny knew that, we do have RFEP information on our academic indicator. It is disaggregated there. I'm not sure if you're suggesting that RFEPs be a separate student group, which would change our student group numbers from 13 to 14 student groups that we would measure individually on, but for the academic indicator, it is definitely a part of that indicator and is disaggregated as part of the additional information.
Yeah, no, I don't mean how many students or having them as a student group. I'm saying it is an indicator, the reclassification rate, how well and how quickly we reclassify students is one of the state priority metrics in Ed Code. And we just don't really highlight that in our accountability system at this time. And one point it was with the LP, mixed in with the progress, which I thought mixing it in, made it then hard to really tell which thing was being measured most in the dashboard. No, I'm talking about the reclassification rate and how well we are doing at moving kids to fluency, not how well the RFEPs are performing on academic indicators.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to pass the baton over to my incredible co-chair, Ed. He's going to continue with the rest of the comments, and I'll kick it to Linda because I see your hand, then Bootsy, then Tara, and Ed, you have the reins. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Linda.
Thank you, Ed. And good morning. A couple things. First of all, just there was a mention about the upcoming state board meeting and looking into the question of a waiver. And I just want to share my appreciation for the state board moving forward with that. I know we talked about it at our last meeting, and I really appreciate the work that the state board is doing to pursue all sorts of options for us that really take into account the realities of education this year, and also take into account the question of validity of test results in a time like this. That said, I also wanted to congratulate all those involved in the development of the ideas for CCI and making that the information available and easily available to school districts. It's really valuable information and can really help with the planning and implementation of programs and services for students. So I'm very, very pleased to see that. I had a question about if I go back a couple of slides to the beginning where we're talking about the teachers and misassignment. As I think about some of the equity issues that we've seen happen in our school system, one of the things we know is that teachers are not randomly distributed in districts, or rather in schools within a district. They tend to find situations where schools that are well-resourced tend to have teachers who are more likely to be fully credentialed. Schools that are dealing in supporting students who are underserved are more likely to have teachers who are misassigned or not fully credentialed. And I'm wondering how we are going to capture that information, because if we, as a state, if we really want to deal with some of the systemic inequities in education, we're going to have to find a way to make sure that we're capturing that information, sharing it with all of us, in our school districts so that we can work on it and move forward.
I could start that off, and then Jonathan, please feel free to add any information you may have additionally. But one of the things we're looking at exploring with stakeholders is actually a total redesign of our reports around teacher and staffing information. Those reports are based on some of our older technology, and as member Kenny mentioned, there's a lot of filters available on our newer reports, and so we want to be able to add that functionality into this. So part of what we're exploring is looking at not only our teachers, but the kind of students that they're teaching, because we haven't really connected it as directly. So what does the population of students look like? But with the new definitions that the state board adopted in 2019 around misassignments, there's a lot greater detail of information that we'll be reporting out on for the first time this year. So I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised about the level of detail. The other piece that is, I would say, a complementary work to this is we're engaged in a pilot project with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing and the California State University System, which is sponsored under the Governor's Cradle to Career work group. And that pilot project will stand up a dashboard come June, talking about what does the teaching population look like that were prepared by the CSU. And so it's it is the first project to get off the ground from the Cradle to Career Project, which is a work group of over a dozen state agencies. It's actually really exciting work. And, a lot of these things, as you probably know, are workarounds because the state removed the funding for a teacher data system that was going to be launched around the same time as CalPADS over a decade ago. So our teacher, the insight into our teaching staff and such, it takes a lot longer because not one single agency owns the data. So I think I would say stay tuned. We're getting close. And with this new set of data that we just received back from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, I think there's some exciting possibilities that will occur definitely in the next couple of months, if not the next year.
Okay, great. That's exciting. It is exciting to hear. And there's one other piece that happens, and I'm not sure that it's captured in our state data in terms of who's credentialed, who's partially, preliminary credentialed, fully credentialed, et cetera, and the misassignments. But districts often employ a practice called various things in different districts, but basically it's taking a fully credentialed teacher and having that teacher teach something for which they're not credentialed. And so it's more likely to happen at the secondary level. And sometimes that works out fine for the district, but oftentimes it doesn't. And that kind of within district decisions about moving staff to teach different things can provide flexibility where you need it, but when it's done pervasively and done as a way to avoid having to kind of search for some other staff, it can lead to people teaching courses for which they really don't have the background. And
yeah, so in this new system, the example that you described, those would be misassigned teachers. And so they would be put through that CalSAS system. They would come up as a misassignment unless there was a local option. They would be determined to be misassigned, and we would report them out as such.
And what do you mean by local option?
Jonathan, can you help me out here with CTC's process?
Yeah, my understanding is that the COEs actually review some of these data and they can essentially give back information to CTC along this CalSAS match that can basically, so if the county has a local option, then they have ways of classifying that differently.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm glad you're working on it. The other question that I wanted to ask about is with the LP for English learners, and where are we on timelines for that for this coming year? Or rather, LPAC really is really what I mean.
So we're, I think that goes back to my original comments as far as, students are being tested right now. There is a special board meeting next week. I don't know what we don't have anything in front of us as far as what options the board is exploring. But anything that affects testing, especially on the LPAC, will directly impact the ability to put out an English learner progress indicator for 2021.
Right. Well, and I would be very supportive of us as a state, recognizing the importance of having valid and reliable information and the difficulty of obtaining that under the current circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Excuse me, we're going to move to Bootsy, Tara, and then Torina.
Thank you for this very clear presentation, and also Cindy for giving us a snapshot into some of the other indicators that are going to happen with Cradle to Career and this pilot project. My question was really around that and taking this opportunity to really introduce new indicators because we're in a space where everything is changing, and so like what great changes could we make while we have the opportunity to do that? So I really appreciate that. My question was about that DEI information, and I hearing you say that there's a lot more diversity, equity, inclusion information that's going to be included moving forward. And also my sort of a question that goes along with that is about social emotional data, and if we are in terms of climate, if we're thinking of any new and innovative ways to collect data around school climate, including attendance data. Is there any, are there any sort of updates or new data collection methodologies or anything like that, considering that this year has changed everything in terms of how we're addressing students' social emotional needs and how we're tracking attendance?
Those are great questions, and we don't have I don't know if Lindsay's on this morning, but we will ask those of our local indicator colleagues. So Josh Strong and others lead that work for the department. But you bring up a good point as to, are we refreshing our look at the local indicators around the survey requirements? I think right now it's every other year. Last year we were prohibited from reporting out on local indicators, so we didn't even collect that data from districts. So we've already lost a year on that work. And then I just wanted to be clear. I wanted to be careful about the words that I used. And I noticed that you said that we were adding new indicators. We are not proposing to add new indicators at this time. What we're simply doing, and I think Jenny described this well, is we're trying to provide transparency into the data so that we can give data that's not used for big A accountability, but more little a accountability, transparency into the data, so districts can, help plan and make appropriate decisions on how to serve their students. So I just wanted to make sure I said that and clarified that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. That I appreciate that. It does make me think, though, how we can then have additional indicators in the big A accountability around the DEI work. But I'm hearing you, so thank you for that clarification.
All right, thank you, Bootsy. Moving on to Tara.
Thanks, Ed. And thank you, Cindy, Jonathan, and Jenny for all the thought that went into this presentation and the plans for this coming year around indicators and data and the accountability system. I wanted to just make a few comments. One, just really excited about the continued work on the college and career indicator and including new elements into that. That'll really expand, opportunities for students in terms of that well-rounded curriculum and opportunities to prepare for college, career, and civic engagement. And I think some incentives for districts to make sure they're then offering all of those different ways to demonstrate readiness. And making those data files available at the student level to districts is huge and exciting, and I hope districts will take you up on them and then use them to ask hard questions and look at the opportunities that are offered there. I wondered, one of the questions at the end was about reporting, and you mentioned an LCFF snapshot. I don't know that I've seen one of those early ones, but I could use a reminder just to see what that template looks like and if that's the direction we want to go this year versus an additional report. So that would just be some helpful additional information. And then on the teacher point, I guess I just want to echo what Linda said about how important this data is in terms of student opportunities, that the access to experienced and fully credentialed teachers is a huge lever for student achievement. And we've seen that in some of the research we've done at the Learning Policy Institute, and also just how inequitably distributed access to fully credentialed teachers is across the state. We're going to have a new report out in a few weeks that looks at how districts are experiencing teacher shortages this year based on interviews with HR directors and superintendents across the state. And I think those inequities continue this year is what we're seeing. So I'm really excited that you guys are moving forward with collecting and displaying that data at the school and district levels. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Tara. Tarina.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for such a great presentation. I want to echo, I'm agreeing with everybody. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. Everything is good. But I did have a question. about the positive transition rate. So joining the military or participating in a Job Corps program, is there a timeline for that report? And I only say this because I know that I have students that want to go into the military and say don't transition right after high school. They might go 3 or 6 months. So what about capturing that data? Because that data would be missed if it's only like within the first 30 days or the first, how is that going to work? How does that look? Because we don't have control on when they're going to join the military or how to recapture that information.
So we would be developing the transition rate based on CalPADS data. And that data we would be looking at end of the year when you exit your students. So it's based on exit codes. That's all that we could have to determine whether they should be included in the positive transition rate. So if the exit code indicated they were going into the military or going into community college, then we could capture that. But if they are exiting and you don't know if they're going into the military at that point in time, then we would not be able to capture that information.
So, I mean, we could say that they're going into the military because the student says they are, but that doesn't mean that they might not go. So then that would still be okay?
I'm going to have to go back and talk with my CalPADS partners because I am not going. I cannot comment on that. They have specific rules in place for how you submit your data. So we'll have to go back to our CalPADS partners and colleagues and find out what those rules are.
Yes, I mean, I think that would be important because I feel people could just put a checkbox in, based on what a student or a parent says, but we don't know if that is actually true. So then the positive accountability, that positive transition rate is just a guesstimate, basically.
Well, if you've ever seen any of the documentation for CalPADS, you know that it is quite extensive, and I'm sure they have information in there about the criteria that must be used to indicate that the student is exiting to go into the military. But we'll get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Jenny, I also, this is Cindy, I just wanted to offer that I'm not sure at the national level that there's a source yet that we can draw from to capture that information either. That just, but going into the military, I think National Student Clearinghouse had talked about collecting it, but I'm not sure about accessing that information. So that's the other piece I think that Cradle to Career will bring into play is how to get some of these data sets from the authoritative source. But those are years away. So just to let you know, it's I think it's sort of out there on a to-do list, but it will take time.
That's good. Linda.
Thank you. As I'm listening to the other members bringing up really good points, one of the things that I think that we're trying to balance here with the DAS schools is the need to be flexible in terms of students having different pathways to eventual success in life versus the kind of discrete identification of high school graduation, a diploma as the indicator that is most likely to tell us if that happens or not. Right now, it's available information, and as you've discussed some of the challenges with some of the other information, that's important for us to keep in mind. But what I don't want to have us lose sight of the fact is that there's much data that's been collected over many, many years regarding the importance of a high school diploma and the advantage to the student in terms of lifetime opportunities, lifetime income of a diploma versus something less than a diploma, such as a GED or one of the other options that might be available. And I think as we move forward with what we want for our students, and again, this gets to, in my mind, it gets back to the equity question. We want the outcome that will position students as well as possible for their future. And I would ask us to keep our focus on what students need, but not lose sight, never lose sight of the critical importance of the high school diploma. And I worry that as we add many other options as part of an accountability system, options which in some cases have been proven to yield fewer benefits than a high school diploma, in others could be more, we don't know, but that we are taking our eyes off what should be an essential outcome for our students, whichever kind of school they go to, and that is their high school diploma. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That.
Ron.
Thank you. I'll make this brief. Just thank you, Linda, and the other members for keeping this focus on DASH students and DASH schools and their accountability. As a former DASH student myself, I think that what we're all concerned about is that the DASH schools are used as a clearinghouse for our comprehensive high schools to help with, this is very cynical, but, helping with numbers, but also making sure that their resources are spent on somebody who's on a diploma track. But hopefully with the reporting that we're doing, we're making sure there is some delineation, that there's the diploma track. And I think we all would agree that the goal would be to get a student transition back to the comprehensive high school to be able to put them back on a diploma track. But knowing that that's not the reality for all of our students, understanding that while continuing your education past your time at a DASH school is important, it's not the same measure of success. And I think that speaks to Linda's point, but I just wanted to reiterate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate the comments there. Any other feedback from CPAG members before we move on to public comment? Joanne.
Sure, just very quickly. I wanted again to say thank you to the team for the additional reports. I've actually been on DataQuest. They are surprisingly user-friendly and easy to use and provide outstanding information for districts. So thank you to all of you for those additional reports. Also wanted to echo my support for trying to more realistically capture what is the comprehensive student experience and looking for pathways to success. So thank you for that as well. I'm looking at the questions about accountability reporting for 2021 and additional reports. I'd also, just for a refresher, support Tara's request to refresh us on what were the LCFF snapshots so we know what that looked like and what might be available. But I'm also thinking that districts should have a fairly robust set of data from their local continuity and attendance plans this year, correct? So as we think about what additional reports we might be asking for, that should be part of the context of the information. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. SB 98 put out some requirements about what data that LEAs had to collect this year, specifically in regards to attendance. And I think that would be important for LEAs to use and to really look at as we move forward. I don't have the LCFF report handy, but I will get it to you. I will send it to Sarah so that you can see it. It's no longer on our website because it was produced before the dashboard, so the information was old and we took it off. But that is a very good point. I will send that to you so you can see what it looks like. Basically, it was a snapshot that tried to provide the data in a graphic format so that people could look at it and see it, as well as sometimes table format. We would want to develop something that's a little more advanced than what we had done back then. And so if we go down that route, we would be looking at making it a little prettier and easier to read and understand.
Thank you, Joanne. Joanne, did you have any further questions or comments? All right, so before we move to public comment, I just want to express, again, Cindy, Jonathan, Jenny, a good number of members have already acknowledged just the significance of your work, and I just want to be able to acknowledge that as well. The last thing I'd like to say is, last week, actually on a week ago today, I finished my week in one of our alternative schools and just took a significant amount of time to listen to the voice of our students and even our teachers. And I know we've been working and responding to issues around, alternative schools and the dashboard in particular pre-pandemic. But when you really listen to the impact that's occurring on our students and teachers at this time, the relevance of this discussion again continues to sharpen. And I'll finish with the voice of a student and a teacher last week. He was just discussing how challenging things have been, but recognizes the importance of just education as being an anchor. And for a teacher, was just saying that a common theme that she has experienced is just this ability for students to have a sense of vision and hope beyond 1 year or 2 years is challenging, let alone a week. But right now, the challenges are very significant and immense. And so just appreciate the relevance of this discussion and where we continue to head on this, because as Linda, I think, was really highlighting, the impact is so great on individual students and of course, the broader community beyond. So Melanie, I know you're back. I'm going to pass the baton back to you. We're shifting to public comment. And then my understanding is we're going to go on a break. Did we lose Melanie? Did we lose Joanne?
Actually, I think Melanie is still out, Ed.
Okay. All right. Well, let me go ahead and facilitate the public comment. So we will now open the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You'll be notified when it's your time to speak, and we encourage you to speak, or we encourage you to please state your name and affiliation for the record. Please remember to turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you are following the live feed. Speakers will be limited to 1 minute each. Are there any further public comments? Or I'm sorry, are there any public comments?
Right now, there are a couple of people in the queue, and we'll give it a few more minutes for people to call in. Jay Dillard, if you are looking to provide a public comment on this item, I am going to unmute you now. All right, if we could just give it a couple more seconds to see if someone is getting through. There's about a 30-second delay from the live stream. All right, caller with phone number ending in 5596. I am going to unmute you now, and your minute will begin.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Manuel Bonrostro with California Together. And I want to highlight several issues related to ELs that we encourage for inclusion in the SPE's 2021 Accountability Work Plan. First, we support the extension of the LPAC testing window to fall 2021. This is due to the numerous challenges faced by LEAs in administering this assessment, including technology constraints for the writing-reading components, and the challenges for younger students in completing the listening and speaking components in a distance learning setting. Second, we encourage the SBE to begin research and discussions now on ELPI standards using two-year progress measure, comparing 2019 to 2021 data, which was something that the CDE brought up as a recommendation. And lastly, we encourage the CDE to engage with EL stakeholders on these ELPI performance issues prior to bringing its recommendations to the CPAG or the board. This will allow stakeholders to provide input prior to decisions being made. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go back to caller with phone number ending in 5596. You should be unmuted and your time starts now.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I'm also lifting up the comments from the Equity Coalition. We appreciate very much the robust conversation that the committee had this morning and a good presentation by the department on all the data that is being provided, with so much data that is not available on the dashboard. It will be really useful for stakeholders to have this data. We appreciate the work being done around the teacher quality data, and we believe that it's an important step to have that data on DataQuest, but we hope this year it will flow sooner to updating the dashboard as the budget trailer bill contemplates. And we hope that you will support that forward movement faster. We would like to make sure that this is included in the accountability work plan. We also echo the comments that our colleagues in Californians Together just made around English learner proficiency indicator, and especially about meeting with stakeholders prior to coming to you on it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Caller with phone number ending in 8945. I'm going to unmute you now.
This is Suzanne Cooey from the Charter Schools Development Center. Good morning, Chair Green and CPAG members. We really appreciate all the new data CDE is providing. Regarding LP, we hope CPAG and CDE will address reliability of the metric for schools and LEAs that help English learners move faster than one level per year. Fast progress changes the pool of English learners who remain in the tested cohort. So the pool becomes overrepresented by students with greater learning challenges who progress more slowly. So LP subtracts from the strongest schools. Getting these indicators right is really important for identifying bright spots and for motivating educators, especially those who are serving a more challenged population. Also, LP is very high stakes for charter schools because it's one of the 4 indicators used to sort them for renewal purposes. We should really pause to address reliability issues when the stakes are so high. I might not have time for the last comment, but I appreciated all the discussion and the concern I heard on CPAG for looking at trying to value the outcomes of students who are on career prep tracks. And I just want to note that the charter renewal process currently doesn't count the career prep data and can cause closure for schools that really are serving some of those vulnerable groups. Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. We will now take a 10-minute break. And I'd like to ask CPAG members to please turn off your microphones and cameras, and we will reconvene at, how about 10, Sarah, if we say 10:40, would that be okay?
That's perfect.
All right, 10:40. Thank you, everyone. All right, welcome back to everybody. I hope you had a good break. I'm going to ask Rachel if you could go through roll call for us, and then we are actually going to go back to item number 1, agenda item number 1.
All right, thank you, Ed. Melanie Green. Ed Manansala.
Here.
Jorge Aguilar. Rana Anila.
Here.
Bootsy Battlehold.
Here.
Mia Cooper.
Here.
Diane Grote-John. Diane back. Joanne.
Yes, she's here.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Joanne Iskin.
Here.
Linda Kaminsky.
Here.
Kimberly Kinney.
Here.
Tara Kinney.
Here.
Nancy Portillo. Tarina Small.
Here.
And Janelle Woodward.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Rachel. So agenda item 1 is the 2021 California Practitioner Advisory Group Orientation. And I'm going to pass it to Lindsay Tornatore to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Cindy, Jenny, Jonathan, again. We had a nice warm up this morning with our discussion with jumping right into our accountability work plan. And for this item, the purpose of it is to, first of all, of course, welcome our new member, Mia. And also, since this is the first meeting of our 2021 calendar year, we wanted to give a quick refresher on the background, the purpose of this group, and a little bit of a refresher as well on the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which we have a special guest from our CDE legal counsel, Terrence Oler, who is here, who will present as well. So just to give you all just a little bit of an orientation around our work at the CDE and how we're working with you is, again, my name is Lindsay Tornatore, the Director of the Student Achievement and Support Division. This division was formerly known as the Improvement and Accountability Division, so some of you may be more familiar with that name. We actually changed the name of this division in spring of 2020, and we did that because we had a couple of new programs join our division, that being the System of Support Office and the Local Agency System Support Office, which also known as LASSO. And of course, LASSO leads the work of the LCAP, the SIPSA, and other school plan. And with this addition of new programs coming into our division and some new people as well, we felt as a team that we wanted to do a little refresh of the name of our division. And so when we did this, we realized that the common thread throughout all of our work is around the why. And the why of all of the what's that we do is around improving outcomes for students. So that is how we have our new name. Of course, our division also is responsible for leading the work of the Title I programs throughout the state. And so that is the primary reason that we are your main contacts for CPAG, and also another reason that we have the name of Student Achievement and Support. So just a little background. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So again, as I mentioned, the purpose of this item is to give an orientation or refresher background on the California Practitioners Advisory Group, the important role that all of you play in this group as well as advisory members to the state board, and also to overview the Bagley-Keene. But I just also really want to just take a moment, gratitude and appreciation to all of you. I want to thank you all for taking the time away from your very demanding schedules to not only participate in these CPAG meetings, but also in the level of preparation that all of you put into these meetings. We greatly appreciate it. All of you are so important to us and to our process, because the questions you ask and the input that you provide is a really strong way of how we feel that we can help to stay connected to the field, understand the perspective of the practitioners, and your questions and your input really do inform the work that we do. So gratitude to all of you. Okay, next slide, please. So a quick crash course. The background of the CPAG is that the Title I under Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act, requires each state educational agency that receives Title I funds to create a state committee of practitioners to advise the state in carrying out its responsibilities under Title I. Next slide, please. The California Practitioners Advisory Group, CPAG, serves as this committee of practitioners for California and provides input to the State Board of Education on ongoing efforts to establish a single, coherent local, state, and federal accountability system. And for those of you that tune into our state board meetings, as I know all of you are very often participants and following that work. It has always been the goal of California to fit the federal accountability system into our state accountability system so that we have one coherent system. Okay, next slide, please. So again, so if we're going to talk about the actual purpose, again, advisory, to provide input to the state board on practical implications of decisions that the state board is going to vote on. Many of these may include providing input on the design of the local control funding formula, evaluation rubrics, and other decisions related to implementing the local control funding formula. Next slide, please. And accordingly, the CPAG will review any state rules and regulations relating to Title I under the ESSA in order to advise the state in carrying out its Title I responsibilities. Next slide. And just a couple of important web pages for all of you. When you go to our CDE homepage, when you click on it, there's an image here on the screen to the right of what the homepage, landing page looks like at CDE. So the button that all of you can go to is the state board button on the left-hand side under our picture of our Superintendent Thurmond. When you click on there, it will take you, you can find the CPAG homepage, CPAG bylaws, and then of course it links you to all of our state board meetings, agendas, minutes, and items. And next slide, please. And we are here to support all of you. We appreciate your support and your input. The two members from the Student Achievement and Support Division here, in addition to me, are our team members Art Cruz and Chris Aban, who are working behind the scenes and also are here to support and answer any questions that you have as we prepare for meetings as well. And of course, we could not do these meetings without our colleague from the State Board of Education, Sarah Petrowski. Our email address is on this slide. Please feel free to reach out at any time. However, we can help you guys and support you. Okay, next slide. And so with that, I will turn this over to our Deputy General Counsel from the California Department of Education, Terrence Oler, who is going to give us an overview around the specifics of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Lindsay. I hope everyone can hear me. Am I audible to everyone, I hope?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, my name is Terry Oler. First of all, happy Friday to you all. I've been at CDE for about 15 years, and I've enjoyed the ride so far. And in fact, I think I did this presentation to this group exactly a year ago today. So at any rate, glad to be back with you. I think as part of the agenda items, there are two things I wanted to point out to you as far as attachments go. I believe that there was a complete copy of the Bagley-Keene Act as part of that material, which is just something I compiled from the Act. That is something that is up to date, and that's something that as members come in, they should be given that. So I want to make sure everybody has that. The other attachment is the so-called handy guide, which is from the Attorney General's office. It's getting a little dated now, but it's still a good publication. I believe that was attached as well. I do, at the very end of the slide deck, I have some a resources page that will list out some of the things that I've talked about today. Anyway, let's jump into it. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the Act, the three main points here: that transparency in the decision-making reigns supreme. Things that we do as a what we call a state body, which you are, they need to be done in a way that the public can hear and can hear your process, can hear your decision-making. It's a way for the public to have a seat at the table, if you will. And that's what the public comment is about, of course, and the public's ability to access the meeting. The second point of public participation outweighing efficiency. You know, there are a lot more efficient ways that you might get things done. You could have a king that commands what's going to happen, but this is a board type committee where the idea is that you all have, varying backgrounds and experience and knowledge that you bring to the table, that you bring to the discussion, and that's valued input. So a good thing to remember is this process is not efficient by design. It's the idea of getting folks' participation and hopefully at the end of the day coming forward with the best advice and recommendations. The third point, that really need to have communications be done in a public way, and that if there isn't that ability to have public participation, that there's going to be a violation. So I've seen it summarized that there's really 3 duties that a state body such as yourself has. One being to timely and sufficiently notice a public meeting, so kind of the public notice piece. Second, to provide the opportunity for public comment. That's the ability of the public to speak, that seat at the table. The third is to conduct meetings in an open session. Again, this is sort of the idea of open deliberations. Next slide, please. By way of background to the Act, it has been around a while. It dates back to 1967. It is modeled after the Brown Act, which probably a number of you are familiar with. The Brown Act is what applies to the school districts and local bodies. Very much similar. There are a few differences here and there. Don't quiz me on what the differences are, but there are a few little differences here and there. That third point being the important one as far as legislative intent, that actions of state agencies be taken openly and that deliberations be conducted openly. Notice openly is mentioned twice in that government code section in just that one sentence. I would mention that in response to COVID-19, the governor did sign a couple executive orders that impact the Bagley-Keene Act. Most notably, the idea of things not having to happen in person. So that's the executive order that I mentioned there, the N2920. There's another one that's not nearly as important to you all probably, which is N3520, which I've got at the end of my slide deck as a reference. But basically that allows state bodies to receive emergency updates from government entities. Probably not that applicable to you all. Okay, next slide, please. So what is a meeting, quote unquote? So a meeting has these 3 components. It's when a majority of the members meet or otherwise communicate to hear, discuss, or deliberate on an item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the state body. So basically, if you've got a majority talking about things that are CPAG related, that's going to be a meeting, all right? And I don't know if you all have subcommittees or are thinking about subcommittees, but I did throw this word of caution in here that if you were to form a subcommittee, bear in mind that a subcommittee of 3 or more folks would be a state body unto itself, so that all the Bagley-Keene rules would apply to that subcommittee. So that's a good thing to bear in mind. So I believe, I don't know how many people are on the call. I think as I counted, if I've got my numbers right, there may be about 16 members of this committee. So think about, anytime you've got 9 folks, you've got a majority of folks, and that's when things really get concerning in terms of talking about anything CPAG related. I think as more of a general caution point is to think about anytime you've got more than 2 or so, to just be bearing in mind that to be careful about not talking too much business and being aware of this rule that you really can't be discussing things or taking any kind of action with regard to CPAG type items. Next slide, please. Wanted to emphasize that the rules on meeting are not limited to just action. It's not just related to voting. It also relates to hearing, discussing, or deliberating. Give a few examples there: study sessions, even pre-meeting briefing sessions, would be covered by Bagley-Keene. Of course, conversations within your jurisdiction, any aspect of talking about decision-making, any of that kind of stuff. That first item, you'll see there's a reference there to the handy guide, which I mentioned below, which is the AG publication. Next slide, please. This is kind of an interesting concept with regard to what a meeting is, this idea of serial meeting. And the idea with a serial meeting is that you can't accomplish by individual through individual what is prohibited by the whole. And what I mean is, I give you a couple examples there. One is the wagon wheel spoke example, where if you can imagine maybe a member as being the inter hub, and then maybe other members being at the end of each spoke, you can't have a situation where that member in the center is communicating outward to another member, and then communicating yet to another member, and pretty soon you're going to have a majority having been spoken to, and that could very well constitute a Bagley-Keene violation. The other one that's probably easier to get your arms around is the second one, which is just the chain communication. That is, one member speaks to another member, that member then speaks to another member, and pretty soon you've got a majority there, which could also result in a Bagley-Keene violation. Next slide, please. So some practical advice on trying to avoid Bagley-Keene and serial meeting type violations. Be careful about communicating amongst yourselves that are not in the formal public meeting setting. And another one that I think is really good advice is to be careful about emails. Hopefully staff will be careful about sending emails to you, but if they do send emails to you, be very careful about hitting the reply to all button, because anytime you're getting into any kind of substantive content about what you all are doing, that could technically be a violation. So the reply to all button is not your friend, and how easy that is to make that mistake. So be careful on that one. Next slide, please. So there are special rules dealing with telephonic meetings, and you are an advisory body, so I give you some law dealing with advisory bodies and telephonic meetings. As a practical matter, during this crazy time that we're in COVID-19, that stuff's kind of been thrown out the window for the most part because of this executive order, which is making it a lot easier for state bodies such as yourselves to meet and discuss things. And I did reference that before. That's the N2920 executive order, and I list some of the things that it does in terms of easing some requirements. But there'll come a day, hopefully, where we're not under emergency orders and we're out of the COVID mess. And so that law with regard to advisory bodies would be of interest to you sometime down the road. Next slide, please. As far as notice of the meeting, I don't think that you all are going to necessarily have to worry about this too much. It's probably up to your staff to help figure this out for you, but I just wanted to give you some bullet points on the notice of the meeting, and especially draw your attention to the last point there, which is the notice shall include a specific agenda containing the brief description of the items for business. And the agenda piece, that's an important thing, because that agenda is going to confine the items that you're allowed to really talk about as a committee. Next slide, please. So some key points on the agenda item, as just referenced. You can't deliberate on an item that's outside the agenda, and think about the rationale for that. And that is that it's a matter of basic due process for the public. As you might imagine, people plan their lives around agendas, public meeting agendas, and if it's not on the agenda, they're not going to have any notice that they should be coming to this meeting to present their piece, right? And that's a big deal because I don't know what kind of participation your advisory committee gets, but I can say from time to time that the state board literally has busloads of people that come to speak about specific agenda items. So, if you're off tangent and you're speaking about things that are not on the agenda, there may be interested folks that are not able to participate. Must allow for public comment. As I've watched your last item, I can see that you are instituting a time limit, which is fine for each speaker. Can't require folks to sign in to a meeting. Those are some of the main points. Next slide, please. With regard to closed sessions, there are specific statutory reasons for why there could be a closed session. I'm just going to kind of cruise right on by this. I doubt that that's very applicable to what you all are doing. And I would warn you that the statute that I've got there is long. It's very long. So if you have a situation where you think there might be a need for a closed meeting, definitely you'd probably want to take a peek at the statute. You might want to even seek out some legal advice. Again, hard to imagine exactly how that would come about. The main point is that there are specific rules pertaining to when there can be a closed session, and they're pretty limited. Next slide. So as we've already alluded to, the public has some important rights in this Bagley-Keene. They call it an open meeting process for a reason. There's some important rights for the public. The first two we've kind of touched on. They're really the fundamental aspect of due process. And, if I had to do this again, I would probably reorder number 1 and 2. Is a key concept of due process is notice and then the right to be heard. And those are covered in those first 2 points. Accessibility, we mentioned, can't be required to sign in. This might be a surprising one, but the public does have a right to record the meeting. There's the right to address the body, which I know you all are doing with regard to public comment. Right to criticize. That may not be the most easy one to accept, but certainly the public has the right to criticize. And the last one I think we've touched on as well, that the public has the right to agendas. They need to know what's going to be covered so that they can plan their lives around being able to attend and provide some comment. Next slide, please. So where does the rubber meet the road in terms of what are the potential consequences? And the first one is rather dire, and that is there's a potential for a criminal misdemeanor prosecution. That I'm sure gets everybody's attention, which it's sort of intended to do. I don't want to unduly scare you by that. It's a pretty high bar for being able to be criminally prosecuted for a violation. And basically the government code section says along the lines of if you were to attend a meeting and you intended to deprive the public of some information, knowing that the public was entitled to that kind of information, that's where you start getting into the misdemeanor realm. It's really on the intentional, willful end of things, but it is there. Other things that may be more common is that actions taken in violation of the law could be void. So if there was a violation, you might have to figure out how to unring that bell if it could be unrung and do it again. Possibility of attorney's fees if somebody were to sue. And of course, harm to the agency's reputation of just having made a blunder and having to try to fix it. Next slide, please. So communications among board members. Mentioned a couple of things here. Can have purely social conversations, can attend training events as long as you're not discussing things within the agency's jurisdiction. I think those are really the main things as we've talked about. Anytime you're talking about anything that falls within the realm of CPAG's work, I just think you have to be really careful. Next slide, please. As far as communicating with the public, it's fine to share the work of what you're doing, what your mission is, and to get input. I think part of the idea of this public body idea is that you would be getting some input from the public, and they would have an opportunity to influence, your thinking on things. But I think it is important to, if you're going to express a view to when you're talking to members of the public, it's good to caveat that what you're speaking on behalf of yourself. You're not speaking on behalf of the organization of CPAG. Also, this last one is real important in terms of being careful not to indicate how you intend to vote on something. We all should be keeping an open mind on how we're going to go. So that's a good caveat. So I am going to take some questions. I wanted to give a little bit of a summary, but I don't know if this slide is available generally, but I wanted to have to the next slide just to give a resources page. I think we've touched on these two things, the two executive orders. I mentioned the last item about the handy guide. And I also wanted to give a call out to the Department of Consumer Affairs publication, which is another good publication. And that's actually a call out coming from my boss. She particularly likes that publication and has shared that with folks. So those are just some general resources for you. As far as maybe the most important takeaways, watch out for discussing anything that has to do with CPAG. Discussing, hearing about things as a majority of members, be real careful about that. Maybe the second important takeaway is really be careful to reply to all when you're dealing with an email that has to do with your business, the CPAG business. And I guess lastly, just being mindful that this is a public body process that is not necessarily efficient. It can be a little frustrating to try to get consensus, but it's designed to be that way. So just trying to be patient with yourselves and others as you do your good work. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and open it up if you've got any questions that I might be able to answer. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Terrence. Thank you, Lindsay. Any questions or comments or even feedback from CPAG members? Right, I do not see any hands. That's how clear the presentation was coming. Lindsay and Terrence, thank you very much. We do appreciate just the reminder, the overview of the purpose of CPAG, and of course, the presentation, Terrence, that you just provided. I've always, I think at the beginning when we were establishing CPAG and there was this vision or charge, I should say, to establish a single coherent local, state, federal system, we knew that was a large charge, but it is good to participate in the process and of course understand how important that is, integrating the public as well. So thank you again. We are going to go ahead and shift to public comment. Give me one moment. So we will now open up the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You'll be notified when it's your time to speak, and we encourage you to please state your name and affiliation for the record. Please remember to turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you're following the live feed, and speakers will be limited to 1 minute each. Now taking public comment.
Caller with phone number ending in 5596. I'm going to unmute you now.
Great. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Good morning again. This is Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I really appreciate this presentation on Bagley-Keene. And I want to take the opportunity of this item to thank you all publicly for your work on this important body. Some of you may know Public Advocates, but some of you may not. We are a nonprofit civil rights legal organization, and we've been around for 50 years. Our work supports grassroots community stakeholders to engage in education advocacy in their local schools and districts. And we do education policy at the state level in close partnership with community-based organizations. As you know, education rights are meaningless for many, especially low-income students whose families and communities often lack the capacity to enforce those rights. Our technical assistance and support, as well as our advocacy at the state level, is drawn from our work with organizations in which they are members. And so we rely on you and your experience with our community partners, as well as their communities. In any event, we want to thank you. We know this is sort of thankless work, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. There are no other public comments at this time.
Okay. Prior to moving to our next agenda item, we are actually going to take a 5-minute break. And so I'm going to be real specific here. If we can aim for 11:18 a.m., 11:18 a.m. So feel free to go ahead and put yourself on mute and close out your cameras, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Behind your computers and you haven't opened up your camera, we'd ask that you do that. We're going to get started. Here, just another few seconds. All right, we're going to officially get started. Oh, how quickly 5 minutes can go. Welcome, Superintendent Aguilar. We're going to actually just begin with roll call, and Rachel, I'm going to ask you to facilitate that, and then we'll move to agenda item 3.
All right, thank you, Ed. Melanie Green. Ed Manansala.
Here.
Jorge Aguilar. Jorge, are you with us? I see you on the screen. Maybe not yet. Ron Anaya.
Here.
Bootsy Battleholt.
Here.
Mia Cooper.
Here.
Diane Grote-John.
Here.
Joanne Iskin.
Here.
Linda Kaminsky.
Here.
Kimberly Kenny.
Here.
Tara Kinney.
Here.
Nancy Portillo. Tarina Small.
Here.
Janelle Woodward.
Here.
We have a quorum. And I have to say, you all are getting really good at answering that quickly.
It's a very smooth cadence. Yes, Rachel, thank you. So agenda item 3 is an update on the development of student level growth, the student level growth model. And this item will be presented by Jenny Singh and Kimberly Mundink. And I will first turn to Board Member Strauss for some framing remarks. Thank you, Board Member Strauss.
Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate it. So this is an item we've been working on at the State Board for a really long time. And we've been working long to get it right. Let me just say that. We're one of the last states that has adopted a growth model, but there's never been, we've continued to have a desire to adopt one, but we wanted it to be relevant, reliable, and would be able to complement the academic data that we do currently report. So just understand it is coming to the board in March. Your voice today will be really important as we try to finalize. You'll see we've done a lot of additional calculations. ETS has been quite helpful to us in looking at how to deal with some data that we weren't sure we were getting it completely right. So understand, we've been, the advocates have encouraged us for a long time. The core districts have been using a growth model. And this really is a long, but we hope worthy journey to get a quality growth model that will work. So again, I just have to thank Jenny, Cindy, and the entire team and ETS as their support for running amazing amounts of data with all different calculations to make sure that when we give it to a district, it will be valid and reliable and will be helpful to inform their practice. So with that, I'll turn over to the team to present and just thank you all for really focusing on any specific feedback that we want to share with the board at our meeting in March. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Strauss. This is Cindy Casanes, again, Director of the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. I'm going to kick us off for this item. As Member Strauss indicated, we have been working on this for years. We're actually going to walk you through the timeline and the various actions that the board has taken over the last 5 years that have led us to this place. You may be thinking, why now? In the midst of a pandemic when we did not have student testing last year, are we continuing to pursue this? And I think Member Strauss said it well. We are one of the last states to adopt this. We have momentum. We've been working towards this to get it right. We've been really thoughtful about it. And so if anything, we want to make sure that while we still have some kids in the schools that they were in 2 years ago, when they developed, we have a growth score for them. We want to make sure that that data is being able to be given to districts to at least have some historical knowledge of these students and where they were at when they were last tested compared to prior tests. So with that, Jenny, I'm not sure if there was anything on that next slide to cover. I think I'm going to turn it over to you, but yeah. I think just to close this out on just the opening, as I mentioned in item 2, again, there is a board meeting next week in which the assessments for this current year will be discussed. You will not see that reflected in this item because at this point we are, working with the knowledge we have, which is students are being tested currently, and so we are again ready to shift directions as needed with the growth model. You'll see at the end of this presentation really our next steps. We've detailed it very by month and by year about where we're expected to land. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Jenny, and I want to thank her leadership and Kimberly's hard work on this project again for the last 5 years.
Thank you, Cindy. And as Cindy indicated, we did want to start off by giving you a little bit of an historical background because we have invested a significant amount of time in researching student growth models for accountability. And it's, we started back in 2015. So it's been a very long road, but I am very confident that the growth model that we're going to put out is going to be valid and reliable and is going to be more stable, have more validity from year to year and stability from year to year than any other model that other states may have. So I think that's, we're really excited about it. So with this timeline, again, we started in March working on the accountability on a growth model within our unit. And then we began working with our technical design group on a growth model in September of that year. And then in 2016, we started our collaboration with ETS, Education Testing Services. That's been a wonderful collaboration. They have been very easy to work with, and they've been very helpful, and they have such depth of knowledge. It has really helped us quite a bit. Then in 2017, we met with the board to discuss criteria for the selection of a growth model. And then, of course, in April, we actually did a formal contract with ETS for some evaluation studies. So based on the conversations that we've had with lots of people, we came up in 2008, in February of 2018, with 3 studies that we wanted to explore. So it's the residual gain, which was actually recommended by our technical design group. Change in distance to MET, that model was actually recommended by assessment directors. And then the conditional percentage ranking, that was actually recommended by the assessments technical design group. And so we asked ETS to do a study on all of those, and they gave us a report in February. Then we went to the board in May, and they actually approved moving forward with further exploration of the residual gain model. And of course, that resulted in part 2, in the study of part 2 in June. So we provided that study to the state board, and we had a conversation in July of 2018. And based on what was in the report and the feedback that we had gotten from various groups, we decided to, the state board decided to put a pause on the growth model. And mainly because they felt that currently the model didn't fit the requirements our established accountability system had in place, and it didn't really provide the answers and information that our various stakeholders had indicated they wanted to have. So in 2019, at the request of the state board and with support from West Ed, we had a growth model stakeholder group, and we had 4 meetings. And we talked about the various growth models out there, the pros and cons. As you all know, there's a lot of growth models out. They all have certain things that they tell you, and they all have strengths, and they all have weaknesses. But based on the conversations from those meetings, it did influence CDE and SBE decision to continue to pursue the residual gain student growth model. And then in 2020, we started working on the technical modifications with ETS and the technical design group. One of the modifications we made was to revise the highest obtainable scale score. And we did that because when the Smarter Balance first set the scores, it put a ceiling on how much growth students at the high end could demonstrate. So we went ahead and we revised those scores. We were not, many other states have already done that before us, so this was nothing new. And then ETS developed a new regression formula to increase accuracy and stability. So, as I said, we've been working very closely with ETS to improve the validity and cross-time stability of the residual gain model, which is based on simple averages of the growth measures. So ETS has developed the empirical best linear prediction, or EBLIP, methodology, which creates an approximate weighted average of student growth measures from multiple years. So some of the decisions that have already been made, I mean, we've been doing a lot of work over the years, but we've been having, communication with the board on a regular basis, and they have made decisions as we move forward. So in March of 2020, the SBE approved to move forward with the residual gain model and to investigate how additional modifications to the model could enhance validity and cross-time stability. Then at the November 2020 meeting, the board did affirm that the EBLIP will only use the same subject area when modeling student growth. So we would only use ELA results to come up with an ELA growth score. And then they also indicated that they wanted to maintain the current student level methodology. In other words, they did not want to include additional variables such as student demographics and program participation into the model, because they wanted to hold the same expectations for growth for all student groups, and they wanted to be able to compare the progress of these student groups over time to see if the achievement gap was growing or shrinking. So I want to go back to the weighted averages because I think it's really important that we understand this. We hope that the memo that we provided outlined this in a really clear manner. We worked really hard with ETS to make sure that we could hopefully take very technical information and put it in language that is easier for the general public to understand. So for the weighted average, it gives the eBlip gives greater weight to the data from the most recent year and less weight to the data from the previous school year. But weights are specific to each school and district and are dependent on the number of growth scores for that school or district. So what that means is if you have a school that, let's say, has 2,000 students, the weight on the current year might be 99%, while the weight on the prior year is only 1%. But if you have a school that only has 30 students, the weight on the most current year might only be 70%, and the weight on the prior year might be 30%. So it really is dependent on the number of scores at each individual school site and LEA. There are always strengths and limitations to any methodology that we have, and of course there are some with the eBlip as well. We can see that the eBlip increases accuracy and stability in the growth scores for all schools and for small student group populations. However, it doesn't always increase the accuracy at the district level when we're looking at large number of scores. Because when you have a large number of scores, the simple average really does work well. So we're going to be recommending the hybrid methodology to the state board in March. And what that methodology, the hybrid, does is it applies the eBlip to all schools, to student groups within those schools, and to the all student group in a district. So the district overall growth score, and student groups in a district if there are 500 or fewer students that make up that student group. So 500 or more, 500 or fewer growth scores in that group. If there are more than 500 growth scores, we will apply the simple average, and that will be applied for whatever race or ethnicity group meets that criteria or whatever program group meets that criteria. So we provided, or ETS provided, a lot of data about how the accuracy and the year-to-year stability impacts student groups in the memo, but we were able to take the data that ETS gave us and actually apply that and come up with the growth scores statewide for all student groups. So we're really excited about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly to take you through the remaining slides.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Hello, CPAG members. I am so glad to be here with you again and really honestly previewing for the very first time. You guys are the privileged audience, as you have been throughout this entire process, which is almost at 6 years now that we've been working on this growth model, and you guys have been here for through the entire way. So thank you for your patience with me, with our team, and all of the hard work that everyone's been putting behind this. And we're almost at the finish line. So next slide. So during this presentation, we're going to try something a little bit different, and we're going to cross our fingers that it works, especially in this kind of forum. So normally when we've been sharing accountability data results, and those of you who have been here along the way with us through the beginning of the dashboard and setting cut scores and such, we normally share these results in percentiles and breaking down the distribution of both all school district results as well as student group results in this type of format, where you can see the percentiles, where the 0 would be the minimum score that we observed within a group. A 100 percentile would be the maximum score that we observed in the data. And then all of those varying percentiles, in this case, deciles, would show what the score is at those certain cut points. And this really kind of helps us to see statistically the median, where does the median fall? What are we looking at for, is there a wide range of distribution of scores, wide performance range? Is it clustered in certain areas? And it really helps kind of get us specific at who is performing, but helps us check the data to see If this is something that's useful, helpful, and again, really helps us assist with what we're going to be going forward with. So this is how you're used to seeing it, but today we're going to show it to you a little bit differently. Next. We're going to be showing you this information using visual charts. And so what we've done is we've translated those numerical charts into a visual graph and horizontally presented for your information here. So each color corresponds to a segment of the distribution. On the far left, you can see for this is the exact same information you saw in that prior chart for this all student group we're sharing. 42.1 is the minimum score observed, so that's 0 percentile. And then that navy blue bar is going to extend. That's our really lowest end of the distribution, which you can see travels quite a far way. So the bottom 10th decile of performance in growth, in this case, extends all the way almost to 90 there. The next bar, the teal bar, would show you the 10th through 30th percentile. The purple bar shows you the 30th to 50th percentile. The orange bar, which I will point your attention to, which will be very helpful in this presentation, is the 50th to 70th percentile. So that's where we're going to start seeing, right, where things move above expectations, right, exceeding the median. 70th to 90th percentile is red, and light blue for that last final tail, the 90 to 100th percentile. I'll also point your attention to the dark black line in the middle, which is at 100. And we kind of spoke to this at the last CPAG meeting about adjusting our scores. And 100 is the represents the growth score achieved if students on average met their expected growth. So if you have an entire population, your all hits exactly at 100, that means all of your students are meeting an expectation. They've all scored right there. They met their growth expectation. Anything above 100 means that students are both meeting and exceeding their growth expectations on average. Again, remember, all of these are averages going together. And anything below 100 means that students on average are not meeting their growth targets. So that is what we're looking at. And with if I have any questions around this, I can answer them really quickly before we start digging into the data and looking at what the results show.
Any questions, CPAG members? I want to thank Ed for being able to take over. I'm back. I'm just scanning to see if there's hands. Let's start with Bootsy. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'm curious about the color selection, actually, since it doesn't align to how we normally think of those colors.
So again, I would like to remind everyone that there is absolutely zero accountability being attached to the growth model at this time. The growth model is being released for informational purposes only. There is no association with colors and the current dashboard and or utilization of those colors. So these colors were primarily selected, one, for their 508 compatibility, and two, for exactly this purpose, that it does not align whatsoever with our current accountability system. Because there is no embedded accountability within anything here.
So I'm hearing you, but I'm wondering if maybe different colors other than what appear in other places might be used so that there's not confusion, because I just think folks are looking at a glance, and if they look at a glance at a student and see that they're in orange, that might just signal to them that something else is happening, even though I'm hearing you that this is not for accountability, but I'm wondering if there are maybe other colors that could be used.
Point taken. There are very few 508 compatible colors that we can select that are not visually distracting and that are visually pleasing. So we will take that into consideration and prior to our state board presentation.
Kimberly, this is Cindy. Just to clarify, this is only to show the data that ETS has run for us. This is not for, I think, what Bootsy is suggesting, that we will be using to display results moving forward for all time.
This is just for you.
Next question is from Janelle. Go ahead, Janelle.
Thank you. Well, I think you may have just answered it. I was going to comment on the organization of this data. I do like it and I appreciate it. I think when we look at I hear what you're saying is this is not how it will be reflected on the dashboard, but it's accessible and understandable, and sometimes our charts are not. So I actually would encourage us to be thinking about something along these lines for our reporting process. Thank you for showing it a different way. It makes much more sense to me than the presentation of the data in slide 12. I like that. I like the visual.
Thank you.
Any more questions before Kimberly continues? Just let me search the panel. All right, go ahead, Kimberly.
Thank you, Melanie. Next. All right, so with that clarification, and again, I really want to emphasize and detangle that this is just sharing directly the results of what EETS has run for us that will correspond with the data that we will share for informational purposes only, hopefully in April with everyone. So this display shows the distribution of English language arts growth scores at the LEA level for race and ethnicity groups. On the top, you're going to see for the next about 4 slides, the same exact bar for all. This reflects the all performance at the LEA level. So this is what you would see, what a district would receive for ELA for all of their students. And below, you see all of the various race and ethnicity groups displayed here. I want to put your attention, as I said, to that orange bar. So again, whenever you see the orange bar to the right of the black bar, the vertical black bar, you're going to see that over the 50th percentile, meaning that those students are meeting or exceeding it. So if it's towards the right, you're going to see that more than 50% of their students are exceeding or meeting their growth targets. So for various student groups, you can see that that orange bar is placed either to the left or to the right. So for example, our African American students, the 50th percentile bar, that orange, is kind of split in the middle. It looks like only about 45% or 35% rather of their student groups are meeting or exceeding their growth targets. Whereas if we look towards the Filipino student group, you can see that 90% of those student groups are meeting or exceeding their expectations at the LEA level across the state.
Kimberly, a question from Kimberly. Go ahead, Kimberly.
So just want to make sure I'm following along, and this may be a silly question. So each color is an equal number of scores, but when we see a longer or shorter amount of that color, that's how much variation in the actual score results there is.
So we're looking at deciles, right? And you can see that, and to be pointed, the blue, right, are the tails, and those only actually include 10%, right? 10% on the low end and 10% on the high end. And tails in all data, this is a normal distributions are like that, right? The tails go far off into the ends. But all of the other, so teal, purple, orange, and red are all representative of the same number of students within each of those groups.
And that's maybe, I guess what I'm trying to say is a lot of times, like when I look at all, I'm like, wow, look how big the dark blue is, the one that's on the leftmost. But again, it's the same number of students, it's just showing a wider variation. And so when you understand this, I think it's very, very clear. That would be the only caveat I would say. Maybe it has, if we ever do present this to the public this way, say, no, each color represents the same number of scores.
Again, so this is just, so normally, again, we share this information, again, in those decile charts. And additionally, whenever we release that information, it would all be detailed here. We just wanted to give you a quick and easier way rather than sorting through charts of 12 different numbers and then comparing all of those to each other. Really actually trying to find a way for you guys to see comparison among the groups and challenge assumptions and being able to quickly identify where things are and how student groups are performing in this case. So this is how English language arts growth scores appear. You can see that for the most part, student groups are clustered as, around a similar distribution, right? Hispanic students have, student group has the lowest score in this case. Among student groups, the white student group at 131.9 is the highest performing score within student subgroups. And you can see that, and some of them are clustered smaller together with a smaller range in distribution of scores. Some are wider. Next. So these charts that are included, and you'll see them in your slide deck, are a textual representation of what you're seeing on the prior graph. We're not going to stop in them while we look through things, but if you do have any questions about the data and you're looking to, I would make sure you're pairing this information with the chart below or chart above it, and that will help you reference anything if you do have any specific questions about the results you're seeing in the charts. All right, so here we have the distribution of English language arts growth scores at the LEA level for program groups. So again, you see that all distribution on the top and how program groups are different within this. Here we can see a definite difference in student group performance for these program groups than we were seeing with the race and ethnicity student groups. Here, no student group has more than 50% of students meeting or exceeding their growth targets. Here, everything is either split at that 50th percentile, right? Or to the left of it. So here we can see students with disabilities. They only have about 10 to 12%, right? You can see that blue line actually meeting or exceeding their growth targets. And for foster youth, you can see that would be 30%, and homeless youth the same. So we're looking at different growth distribution when we're looking at these student groups. It's not severely there, but for students with disabilities, we're looking at only, again, about 10 to 12% of those students meeting or exceeding their targets. Next. As we've done with other things, and as we do with our academic growth score, our academic scores, we disaggregate English learner performance based on classification by English learners, English learner only, which means they are currently classified as English learners. The English learner group is inclusive of students who have RFEP'd within the last 4 years. We also disaggregate all students who have been RFEP'd, and then we compare that also to the performance of students who have an English only designation, which means at no point in time in their school career have they been identified as an English learner. So here we can see the performance compared to the all group as well at the LEA level. Here, English learners, you can see their performance is they actually have about 40% of their students who are identified as English learners in that group meeting or exceeding the targets. Students who are presently classified as English learners, however, we're looking at about 20% of them meeting or exceeding growth targets. Our RFEPs, as they always do, running away with the show. So we're looking at 70% of them meeting or exceeding their growth targets. And English only students, this might surprise some people. We're only seeing just about a little over 50% of those students meeting or exceeding their growth targets. So we're not seeing a markedly different performance for English only students versus the all distribution that we see as well. Now let's look at math. Same thing. And here we have, for LEAs, it's a pretty similar distribution to our ELA scores. However, certain student groups, their distribution scores have widened in this case, especially you can see some significant tails, for example, within the Hispanic student group. And here we can see that there's 2 student groups who are in Indians. Student groups are underperforming with their performance in math growth. And we have 4 student groups who are exceeding their expectations and targets with the Asian, Filipino, white, and multiple races student groups. So that's, and we have a very narrow distribution for certain groups such as Pacific Islanders. Next. For program groups, we're looking at performance that, again, mirrors the English language arts distribution that we saw. Students with disabilities, foster youth, and homeless youth are performing below expectations and not meeting that 50% threshold. However, you can see that students with disabilities in this chart in math are actually doing a little bit better than they were in English language arts. And here we see the growth performance for English learners in math. And this is different than what we saw for the other chart, in that all of these distributions of groups are to an English learners only is just barely, just a smidge connected onto that 100. So in this instance, all of the distributions that we're looking at of English learners, including English only students, seem to have a very relatively similar performance distribution for math growth. Now we're going to look at schools, and I want to extend the caveat that, because this is my pet peeve in graphs, the chart below, the axis has changed. It's been expanded by 10 points in both directions. So before, our x-axis had 40 to 160. We're now expanded from 30 to 170. The reason why is that, and this can be extended to all of our all of our indicators on the dashboard, the distribution of scores at schools, especially for student groups, is much more varied and has a much wider distribution than it does at the LEA level, right? Because we're talking about averages. As Jenny mentioned earlier, student group size really matters. So when we have smaller student groups that have wonky data or not enough students to change things, it ends up in big tails. So here you can perfectly see this illustrated in our gigantic navy blue and light blue tails being shown here. And you can also see the narrow distribution that happens when we have not as many student groups represented, right, in the population of schools. So there are very few schools that have numerically significant populations of American Indians. So here you can see we have a very narrow, and Pacific Islanders as well, right? They're very narrow distributions because we're not capturing that many observations across the state, right, for school student groups. And again, and I don't think I put this in earlier, but just as a caveat, all of the data you are seeing is only representative of numerically significant, meaning greater than 29 observations at any of these levels. So that's an important thing to note. So here, again, you can see, as far as performance in English language arts, a marked difference between the performance for American Indian student groups and Pacific Islander student groups and African American student groups versus all of the other student groups represented here. Then, as far as program groups, I will point out, you can see there's a good marker here. There are no schools who would have any data represented for foster youth in their growth distribution. We don't, the largest population at the school level is 26. So this would be missing from any reports that we're looking for at the school level. Not at the district level. At the LEA level, you saw results. But for foster youth at the school, it's just not an area that we can measure because we don't have a new, we'll have, obviously we'll report anything greater than 11. So that will be in the file, but we wouldn't have, for like, if we are exploring for accountability purposes, we wouldn't have that numerically significant point of greater than 29 represented for foster youth. Here you can see among these student groups, we have students with disabilities, falling short of expectations at the 50th percentile, right? Their orange bar is far to the left. Next. And here we have English learners, again, at the school level. And here you can see that English learners only, we're looking at 30% of them meeting or exceeding their growth targets versus RFEPs at 60% or 65% of their students meeting or exceeding those growth targets. And here we have a new chart. So we also get questions all the time about school performance by school type. And we thought this was really important to share, kind of looking at the differences between charter and non-charter, DAS and non-DAS, as well as small and not small. So in this case, small schools is representative of less than 150 students within a growth measurement. So here you can see that the distributions look kind of familiar. And the reason why is because those overlap, right? We have among the charter group, you can see that those are representative of the lowest and the highest scores that are represented in the all, right? That kind of shows you there. And non-charter has a very similar distribution to that as well. However, charter schools slightly outperform in the growth target measurements at the all level. For DAS schools, you can see we have a smaller distribution. And this is very important to note that there are only 33 DAS schools represented here. The reason behind that, most DAS schools, or a lot of DAS schools, are high schools. And high schools are not included in any of our observations because growth data only measures the students who are in 4th through 8th grade. So that's an interesting thing and important to note when we're looking at growth scores, that there are relatively few DAS schools that would be represented and captured within the growth model. And as you can see, small versus non-small, not a big difference between the performance there. Very, very slight difference in the expectations, and slightly wider distribution within the 10th to 90th percentile, but not off by any means. Now, let's look at math, and I will point your attention one more time to the x-axis, which has now expanded from 30 to 170, all the way to 0 to 200. So we are looking at a very wide distribution of performance among math growth scores for all student groups. And this is really important to note that while ELA was and at the LEA level and math at the LEA level was between 30 to 160, we're really expanding this performance, and these tails are getting larger. And we're looking at a wider scope of how growth progresses. And there's a lot of those of you who are familiar with assessments and how students grow in math year over year. It's not as linear of a progression as ELA skills are. So year over year, what's being targeted and taught is different, and those standards change. And again, aren't a linear progression towards competency and increased scores on the assessment, on the CASP assessment year over year. So we're going to see a wider distribution of students hitting or meeting their growth targets because of that.
Kimberly, can we pause for a question from Ron?
Yep.
Go ahead, Ron.
Kimberly, thank you for all this great information. Taking a look at the distribution on the current slide that we're on, I'm just curious and just a little bit confused how we have tails that exceed all. So how do we have a score lower for Hispanic students than we do for all, and score on the other end, the light blue, for Asian students that exceed all as well?
Because the all is an average inclusive of every student at a school. The student groups is isolated to an average of only those students inclusive in that student group. So if we have a school that is, in this instance, 95% Asian population scoring 100 and, between 150 and 170 points, right, on our scale, they would receive, their average became 168.4 for their student group only. When we add in that other 5% of students, the average dropped to 151.5.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's to go through. So we're dealing with averages, and that's like, isolated averages and moving forward. But you can see, again, our tails are extreme. And tails are important when we set, when we're looking at guidelines and what we expect out of performance. But if we look again towards our orange bar, we can see that the all student group at the school level is, for all schools, we are, more students than not are exceeding or meeting their growth expectations. That's awesome. But for certain student groups, they are not. In this case, African American and American Indian, Hispanic is split between, Pacific Islanders are not. So these are student groups that are not meeting that. However, Asian, Filipino, white, and multiple races are meeting or exceeding that target. Next. Program groups. Here we have the socioeconomically disadvantaged group at almost 47% are meeting or exceeding that target. That's something that I think would be pointedly surprising. Students with disabilities here are at the school level are not showing the same performance as the LEA level. So we've got a split here, and they've got over 30% of their students meeting or exceeding expectations. And homeless youth, we're at about 42% meeting or exceeding their goals as well. English learners. As you can see the split at the top, we're almost right exactly at that 50%. English learners, 50% of English learner groups are meeting or exceeding their targets, with those RFEP students included. English learner onlys, we're looking at almost the exact same group and same distribution for English learner only within math, which is great to see. And the RFEPs slightly above that with about 54%. And English only students mirroring or reflecting that all group above as well. And our final chart to show you, the distribution of math at the school by school type. Here we can see a very different distribution, right, for the DAS schools, in that we're looking at about 12% of students at DAS schools. Again, it's only 34 of them, but still only about 12% of them meeting or exceeding their growth targets. However, small schools and non-small schools, we're looking at about a very similar performance there as well. So that's good to see. And same with charter and non-charter, very similar distributions within that data, except at the tails where we can see differences. So with that, we really wanted to ask CPAG, because again, you guys are and I 100% tell you, you're the first people to see this. And people have been asking us, what does growth look like? What, who's doing well? What student groups are doing well? What does it look like at the LEA level, school level? You've just seen the data. And we'd really like to hear some of your takeaways on what you've just seen. And if at any point it's helpful during your comment, if you'd like to, for us to pull up a slide, just let us know. And we'll be able to do that too, so we can all partake in, a shared kind of just feedback session on basically what you see in the data and what your takeaway is from this growth distribution and what it means for you or just in general.
Kimberly, thank you so much. I appreciate you connecting it to other conversations we've had, and you're always so cognizant of how to display it in a meaningful way. So I'll give our CPAG members a few seconds to put their hand up for who wants to share their thoughts first. I know we're probably, okay, there we go. So we'll Start with Linda. Go ahead, Linda.
All right, thank you so much. Just one second. Actually, could you come back to me? I've got some noise in the background that I can't turn off. So if you don't mind going to somebody else.
No problem. I'll switch you with Kimberly. Kimberly, do you want to go first? And then we can come back to Linda. Go ahead.
Sure. So I feel like the last time we talked about the growth model, we talked about communicating it out. And so my question is a little bit about that, because it sounds like, we're very, very close to going forward with this. So in the, when I'm explaining this to any of my constituents, what do so we're measuring the growth between what the student achieved or what a school, then we're looking at averages, and what we expected. So I'm assuming people will say, well, how did we get to the expected? So in other words, this measurement's importance, as long as we agree that the expected is a thing, that we want to be measuring, that difference between what they got and what was expected. So like, if people ask me that question, is this, I guess I'm trying to understand, is expected something that for a student who is below grade level, the expected score encompasses them getting to grade level or making consistent growth, and also for students who are potentially scoring above grade level, is their expected growth then smaller? So how, just help me understand how I would explain what this means to someone, and maybe that's not really what you're asking us to do today, but it feels like it's getting very close to the place where I'll have to do that explanation.
You are beating us by 2 slides. And we are on the precipice of that exact discussion, right? And helping the field understand what we just shared, right? And interpreting their data, including at the student level, right? What this all means. And one of the first things, and it's a perfect reminder, so thank you for it today, is that we need to disentangle students on grade level and above and below grade level with the growth discussion, because CASP does not measure what grade level a student is performing at. There are multiple private companies that do this and sell school systems that provide a above below grade level interpretation. CASP does not do that. We use CASP and we measure where a student's prior score was, right? We use their current score and their prior scores to interpret how much growth they should have made. And then we measure to see how much growth they made, if that was above, if they met that target, if they exceeded that target, or they did not meet that target, and by how much. And then we average all of that together and provide this aggregate score. So, but it's perfect for me because we are going to go through, and this is not a one webinar process. This is a very expansive communications issue that we need to work with from the ground up with focus groups and stakeholders to really help understand the data, communicate the data to them, and then allow them to communicate that data to their stakeholders. And this is this is a big lift, and I'm so excited to get to that point. But we are not there today. I will tell you that 100%. That is not where we are today. We're really at like the pre-step to that.
All right, but again, understanding who decided what the parameters were for expected growth, like who said expectations are A instead of B, instead of X, instead of Y, that to me will make or break people's desire to believe in this as a valid growth. And so, I don't know if you can at least touch on, who decided what the expected growth was and where did it?
Yeah, so it's really important to understand that the residual gain growth model is what makes that decision, right? We have multiple growth models out there. We decided on the residual gain. The residual gain, the process that is used is you look at students in a grade that have similar scores, and you look at the prior year data and current year data, and taking all those scores together statewide, based on the statewide data, that is where the expectation comes from. So it is based on the calculation of using the residual gain model. There are other models out there like the percentile model where they're looking at students in each percentile. So, I mean, in each percentage point. So the students in the 1%, they're looking at those students and comparing how those students in that 1% are doing, whether and determining whether half of those students have met their growth expectation or not met their growth expectation. So I think the board has multiple times indicated that the residual gain model is their preference of a model, and that is what is actually going to determine what the expectations are. And we are working with SCOE, and this is on a new slide that we haven't reached yet, to develop a video that explains the residual gain model and how it operates and how the eBlip operates.
Great. So again, if I have a colleague on my board who really doesn't like to compare kids to other kids and wants to look at individual student growth, this model might not satisfy him because it is really the expected growth is based on what all the other kids are doing. Is that true?
Correct. But let's remember that we will be giving districts their data files, and their data files will have the individual growth scores for all students in their school. So they can look at that individually if they want. So that information will be available to them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Kimberly. Linda, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. First of all, I can't tell you how happy and excited I am. Thankful to the state board, thankful to the CDE for all the work that you've done to get us to this point. As you shared with us, it's taken years and years, but it is really producing something that my hope is will be very, very helpful for families, for schools, for the public to understand where we're going, and that we are looking not just at a static piece of information, but long-term, looking over time at how kids are growing in their abilities. So thank you so much. It's really something to be proud of. I had a couple questions though. Kimberly, back to what Kimberly was saying, the difference is between expected growth, which is somebody makes a decision about how much growth should occur, versus in this growth model, it's observed growth. It's the growth that was seen to happen. And then asking, given what we saw on average, are different student groups or individual students doing the same, better, or not as good? So the difference is between some outside definition of what's expected versus this kind of inside definition of what was observed. The third thing I wanted to bring up was I was interested in the slides that showed the performance of all students, and then right underneath it, this performance of students with economic disadvantages, and typically there's very little difference in it. And as I reflected on it, one of the things that I realized is that our percentage of socioeconomically disadvantaged students in our school system statewide is fairly high. I believe it's over 50%, maybe even approaching 60 something. And so those kids are included both in the alls rightfully, but that may be contributing to why we're not seeing a lot of difference between them. And it might be interesting to do the kinds of breakouts that we have available to us already with CAS, where you compare kids who are socioeconomically disadvantaged and kids who are not socioeconomically disadvantaged. Same thing with any of the groups, like special ed also. Next, I wanted to, if you don't mind, could you just tell me again, what are the definitions for English learner, only EL, and RFEP? Just so that I have that in my mind.
So English learner within the academic context and the academic indicator, we are inclusive of all students with a current English learner designation, as well as all students who have been reclassified within the last 4 years. That is the English learner
Thank you.
classification.
And then I understand the other two. And RFEP is RFEP within 4 years or RFEP within 1 year?
RFEP is all students who have been reclassified.
Beyond 4 years?
Yep, all students.
Okay. Actually, I was very happy to see that the information was broken down into these different groups, so that it wasn't just kind of a one-line version of how English learners are performing. I would suggest, however, that the first one where it says English learners, that we label it the way other aspects of the work on English learners gets done, to be ever English learners, if that's the right match with that category, because it's a little confusing. I think the general public would think this would mean current English learners, but it doesn't. It means current and former. So just renaming that to call that distinction out would be helpful for folks.
So just as a clarification, the English learner student group is the one that is utilized for accountability purposes. So that's a different designation. It's not an ever EL.
Right, I understand. Okay. Well, then clarify it somewhat, because I think it's confusing to the general public. And it's also important for school districts and schools to understand that it's reflecting, in their system, if the student is still an English learner, they're going to be eligible for very specific supports and approaches, of which most likely the RFEP kids do not need. And so it's helpful for the school districts to really look at who specifically they need to work with.
That's a good point. Thank you, Linda. We'll have to rethink about how we're going to label that.
Okay, thank you. But again, let me just thank you again for the work, because it rightfully has taken a long time. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into it and all the work, and appreciate hearing how supportive ETS was to help you move this forward. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to Tarina. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I think I might have a little glitch. I'm in the matrix right now, so please excuse me. Thank you guys so much for everything that you guys put together. But I know you said that there was only 33 DAS schools, I guess, that were in this, that were 4th through 8th grade. Now, what's the difference, or is there going to be a change in data for those DAS schools that are only 9th through 12th, or are they not going to get a report because they are 9th through 12th?
So there is no growth model for high schools, right? Because we only test once. We test in 11th grade. And at no point with all of our technical advice that we've received from both our technical design group as well as the assessment divisions, their TAG group, we're all in agreement universally prior to, I believe this was in 2017, that it's not technically valid to have a growth model go from 8th to 11th grade.
Thank you. And then that would be clear whenever you do district, that this is only representing the 4th and 8th grade.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good reminder to clarify that once again, because there's a lot of things, we go through our assumptions and everything else, and we didn't have that in the slide deck. So it's a great clarification for us as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just giving folks a second to see if there's any other questions, any other takeaways on any other initial takeaways on the growth data distributions. Go ahead, Joanne.
I just wanted to say very quickly, congratulations on a data display. I really did not know how you're going to do that, but the visual display is I think very clear, and with your explanation very intelligible. So congratulations on the visual display.
Thank you very much, Joanne. It is good work when you're in our lovely isolated world where you can't pass around a piece of paper to everyone and say, do you understand this? Thank you very much. So we are, our goal, and just to re-emphasize this again, we completely understand that this is a huge, heavy lift for everyone involved. we're no different in that, and we really want to make sure that until this information comes out again, right? We're not repeating old information. We want to make sure that when it does, it is clear, concise, and everyone understands it when they go to utilize this information in their districts and in their schools. And so that's our goal, and I hope that this was a good stepping stone towards that purpose.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. So I think that's all for CPAG discussion. And Sarah, if we're ready, or no, I'm sorry, Kimberly, sorry, go ahead. You did say you had more slides. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pass it back. He's going to walk us through what growth looks like coming up.
Okay, so next steps. So in March of 2021, so next month, we are going to be bringing the growth model for a recommendation for approval at the SBE meeting. And of course, this information, the growth model information, is only going to be for informational purposes only, because it is prior year data. Then April 2021 through November 2022, we are going to be working with LEAs and stakeholders on developing and implementing a communication plan, data use cases, etc. And then December 2021, the data to calculate a growth score is unavailable, because remember, we did have a suspension of assessments in the spring of 2020. So we cannot actually produce a growth score for December of 2021, which is when we typically release the dashboard. And then in December of 2022, we can release growth scores for information purposes using CAS data from the 2021-22 school year. But at that point, we will continue to use current academic indicator methodology until we have another year of data and figure out how to incorporate and when to incorporate that data into the dashboard. And March 2023 through August 2023, discussions with the state board and stakeholders on how to incorporate the growth model into the dashboard will occur. So we do have a growth model communication timeline for the next 6 months of some of the things that we want to do. So we do want to release the student level data files to LEAs, and then we're going to do that via the Test Operation Management System. You may know that better as TOMS. Additionally, we're going to publicly release the downloadable district, school, and student group aggregate data files. Remember, LEAs will get individual student level data, but the public will only have access to aggregate data files. And of course, you all know that is for purposes, privacy purposes. Then we are going to conduct a webinar on how to read the publicly available downloadable files and the individual student files. Then May through September, we're going to be conducting some focus groups to develop communication and data use strategies. And we're going to do that for LEAs and school administrators, school staff, parents, and the general public. And then we're going to develop a report that also displays our English language proficiency assessments for California levels with growth scores. That is something that we've had a discussion with the state board and with some stakeholder groups, and we have we thought that might actually provide some good data for LEAs and for schools. And with that, we can take more questions, or I don't know if we want to move on to public comments.
Let's see, are there any other questions from CPAG members? All right, I think with that, we'll move to public comment. Thank you so much, Jenny and Kimberly. So you'll see on the line on the slide, the information to call in for the public comment queue. If you're wishing to provide, members of the public, if you're wishing to provide comment on this item, you can do so by calling the number on the slide, and you'll be notified when it's your time to speak. I encourage you to state your name and affiliation for the record. And remember to turn down your speaker volume if you're following the live feed. Speakers will have 1 minute each. Any public comments yet?
Not yet. We're going to give it a second to allow for the delay between our Zoom and the live feed.
Okay, perfect. Well, I have to say, I'm looking forward to that statewide webinar you mentioned, Jenny. I'm going to get as many people on that as I can.
Well, we hope a lot of people will attend that, and we hope it will be useful information.
Super exciting. Give folks from the public a few more seconds to dial in if they'd like to have public comment. Again, a reminder that you'll have 1 minute, and we encourage you to state your name and your affiliation.
Caller with phone number ending in 5596, you have been unmuted. You can go ahead and start your comment.
Yes, hello. This is Liz Guillen with Public Advocates again, and I want to underscore the comments we made in our coalition letter with others in the LCFF Equity Coalition. Like many of you, we're very excited about where we are with the student growth model. As you know, we've all been waiting for a while and working with department staff to understand this. Our main recommendations are that there be a real focus on communicating how this works to parents and students and educators. And we want to emphasize that because of the diverse student population we have, that this will require communication in different languages and in many different ways. So we look forward to working with staff on how this is to be communicated. And we appreciate the questions that you all have. They were some of the same questions we had.
Time.
So many thanks to the district, to the department staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. All right. Caller with phone number ending in 8945. I am going to unmute you right now and you can begin your comment.
This is Suzanne Cooey from the Charter Schools Development Center. Hello again. It's great to see the distribution data for the groups. Thank you so much, CDE staff. Next question. What does this mean for schools serving different proportions of these groups? One example, we just saw that fewer schools with significant populations of students with disabilities meet their growth targets. By extension, we might anticipate that the model could punish schools because they serve, say, 20% students with disabilities. Many charter schools attract especially high proportions of these students. Will indicators correct for this, or will it punish such schools? An accurate picture of growth and of school quality is important to teachers, to schools, and to the public for many reasons. For charter schools, a distorted picture of school quality could close the wrong schools. Non-charter school educators don't experience live or die accountability. It can be a good thing, but it's only as good as the indicators we use. We ask CPAG members to call out these issues before finalizing high-stakes indicators. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. All right, caller with phone number ending in 0394. I'm going to unmute you now and your time starts.
Hi, thank you. This is Manuel Bonrostro again with Californians Together. Thanks again to the staff and all the questions that were asked during the presentation. It was a wonderful presentation. And I just want to say that we thank the CDE staff for reporting the data with English learner only and RFEP separately. It is also gratifying to see, looking at the level of accuracy, that it was more or less the same in the aggregate for LEA, as well as for the individual student groups. Just looking at the tables provided, along with the impact of the EBLIP and the hybrid proposal idea, we are pleased to see that the disaggregation of this data does not have a detrimental effect on accuracy. And we continue to encourage the State Board of Education to report data on the growth measure by ELs and RFEP separately. And it also continues to be our hope that for accountability purposes that this would eventually be separated. Another area that I want to elevate from comments that previous callers made is the idea of making sure that information is reported to the public in multiple languages, and that it's easy to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny. All right. Caller with phone number ending in 8256. I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, this is Robert Manwaring from Children Now. Thank you so much for all your hard work on moving to a growth model. I started advocating for California moving to a growth model with the Public Schools Accountability Act of 1999. So this is a long time in coming. Just wanted to raise one point, associate my comments with the other members of the LCFF Equity Coalition, and wanted to add one point about possibly considering putting some information on students' individual scores on their CASP parent reports, the ones that go home. Perhaps you could think about grouping students into high performing or high growth, very high growth, medium, low, very low, some categorization like that, so that parents could actually get a sense of how their individual students are doing. Thank you so much.
Caller with phone number ending in 8945. I believe you already made a comment, but I just wanted to make sure.
I did. Thank you. I'm not sure how I got back in the queue.
Thank you. All right, Melanie, that completes public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone who was there for public comment. And I'm just making sure there's no other questions. Okay, with that, this concludes item 3. Thank you again, CDE staff, for all your hard work in putting it together and tying all the pieces together with us and for us. We're going to transition to our last item, which is item 5, which is general public comment. The public comment is invited to comment on any matter that's not included in the printed agenda, and we'll open up the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to provide general public comment can dial the number on the screen. You'll be notified when it's your time to speak, and we encourage you to state your name and your affiliation for the record, and you'll have 1 minute. We'll give folks a second to dial in if they have general public comment.
Caller with phone number ending in 8945. Would you like to make a public comment on this item?
This is Suzanne Cooey from the Charter Schools Development Center. And I guess I just want to briefly say that I think one of the things that's going on is a conflict between the value of setting high expectations for students, which we do want to do. But what happens is we get a set of trade-offs that's occurring when we're trying to assess school quality. Because in school quality assessment, we need to look at where students started and where they end up. But for example, with elementary schools, we're getting only, 4th and 5th grade data, and we're not looking at where they started out since TK. And as we saw, these progressions aren't perfectly linear. And when the schools are serving different populations, we really want to see what schools are serving the most challenged populations well. And some of these, just blanket decisions we're doing, we don't want to look at demographics because of expectations, are then blocking us from actually seeing what schools are doing best for our most challenged populations. So even if this means producing different indicators or producing some different data points, we're losing something really important for our system to learn from, to see the bright spots. So I just wanted to call out that tension and hope we can attend to it in the future. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Suzanne. All right, Melanie, that is the last public comment.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for their time today. And again, welcome our new CPAG member. This concludes the February 2021 meeting of the California Practitioners Advisory Group. Thank you for a great meeting. I hope everyone has a great day. I adjourn today's meeting at 12:35.